Hello everyone, let's start this live stream tonight, Saturday. I will start with showing a video of James 2, which came out yesterday. It's a great video about abiogenesis, and as soon as that someone wants to come in and have a chat, I will stop the video. So enjoy.
He graduated as a chemistry major.
Mention God. This is going to be, I'll just use science to critique the science. Then at the end, I'm going to bring in a scriptural perspective, but it'll be obvious that'll be just at the end. So the scientists among you are going to have to deal with the science as it's presented. All right, so this is a car, and this is not fully all the parts of a car, because some of them you see are obviously still put together. There's still pieces put together, the antenna's still there, but there's a lot of parts there. And I'm not sure how many people that are watching this would be able to put this car back together, even if they had directions. But if you had no directions, think about trying to put this car back together. It'd be kind of hard. But all the parts are clean and nice and all, gathered together in a single room. But what if they were not gathered together in a single room? What if you had to gather them and put the parts of the car together? And mind you, this is much less parts than are needed to make a cell. To make one cell has a lot more parts than this. And imagine if you had to somehow find these or accumulate these. And if they weren't all in one room. What if all of these parts were scattered throughout planet Earth? And you had to find parts. Some would be on top of a mountain, some at the bottom of an ocean, and you got to find the parts and put it back together before the parts decompose, by the way. It's kind of hard to think about that. And many people say, well, these things are not limited to Earth. Okay, well, now find it. Find it out there. Find it out there. The parts have been scattered out there, and they happen to come to Earth on meteorites over a period of many, many years. So find the parts back together. It's kind of hard, right? That's what we're up against in Origin of Life. Try to put some together. And now the parts go bad. Say a certain part is there on Earth and you're waiting for other parts to come. And in the meantime, the parts go bad. They rust out and they decompose. Same thing happens to organic molecules. They decompose. They undergo oxidation. If you don't want an oxygen-rich environment, okay, how about a nitrogen-rich environment? Ammonia. That'll do other chemical reactions. So these chemicals don't last long. So you got to have them all in the same place, all at the same time, or within a reasonable amount of time, because the parts go bad. It's hard to think about how to make a cell. So what's the origin of life? This is a cell, highly complex. It's got all sorts of organelles and all sorts of features here. And some people say, oh, well, this is a modern cell. Cells weren't that complex. They were more like bacteria. Okay. You think a bacterium is simple? You think a bacterium is simple in structure and in composition and in the coordination of parts? And I'll tell you, one of the problems in Origin of Life is that a lot of the people that work in it will be an expert in one thing. Now, we have the good fortune of having worked in the area of organic synthesis, so we know what it's like to have to build molecules. We don't buy molecules in kits like biologists. We have to make them ab initio. And also we work in this area of nanosystems where we try to put molecules together to form systems that work. You have both of these tasks within cells. You have to make the basic components if you want to do this from Origin of Life, and you've got to assemble them. Molecules don't care about life. Organisms care about life, but chemistry, on the contrary, is utterly indifferent to life. Without biologically derived entity acting upon them, molecules have never been shown to evolve toward life. Never. Molecules don't evolve. That chemical synthesis experiment in Origin of Life can be summed up by a protocol analogous to this. And so people always send me things. Oh, what about this paper on this? Trust me, if it's on the chemical synthesis side, it fits into this paradigm. You purchase some chemicals, generally in high purity from a chemical company. Mix those chemicals together in water in high concentrations or in a specific order. And with some set of carefully devised conditions, you obtain a mixture of compounds that have a resemblance to one or more of the basic 4 classes of molecules, chemicals needed for life, which are carbohydrates, nucleic acids, amino acids, and lipids. You need all 4 of those for life. But it's not just a single carbohydrate. There's many of them, and then there's polymers of them, which is hard to do. They don't just hook together by themselves. Nucleic acids. Nucleic acids have a nucleobase, and then they're hooked up to a carbohydrate, and then a phosphate, and then you want to hook them together. They don't hook together by themselves. Enzymes do this. There's no easy chemistry to do this. There's no prebiotic chemistry that does this. Amino acids. You got to have about 20 different amino acids, and they're all different, and you've got to have them, you have to have these pieces, and you have to have lipids. The lipids, the amino acids, nucleic acids, and the carbohydrates are all chiral. Chiral meaning that they have a non-superimposable mirror image. There are a number of different isomers. Isomers increases at 2 to the n, where n is the number of stereogenic centers. And so it is really hard to make these even in racemic form, let alone the chirally pure form that you would need for making life. Then you publish a paper making bold assertions about origin of life from these functionless, crude mixtures of stereochemically scrambled intermediates, much like Miller did in 1952, the original Miller-Urey experiment. Things haven't changed much if you think of it fundamentally. The world thought they were right on the verge of solving the origin of life, but it turned out to be much harder than they thought. We are now over 2/3 of a century past that. Think of things that have happened in 2/3 of a century since then. I mean, we have space travel, we have internet connectivity, we have the structure of DNA, we have the entire silicon era. All of that's happened in the last 2/3 of a century, 66, 67 years, 68 years. Nothing's happened since then that has added anything fundamentally to the origin of life problem. Then they engage with the ever-gullible press to dial up the knob of unjustified extrapolations. Then they watch the mesmerized layperson exclaim, "You see, scientists understand how life formed." Then they encourage a generation of science textbooks writers to make colorful, deceptive cartoons of raw chemicals assembling into cells, which then emerge as slithering creatures from a prehistoric pond. The synthesis problem is this: molecules that compose living systems almost always show homochirality. The only ones that don't are very, very simple molecules. When building molecular systems, constant redesigns are needed, which take the synthesis back to step 1. So if you do something wrong, you got to go back to step 1. It's often impossible to remove a moiety once it's been attached. So if a natural system is going along hundreds of millions of years to get to a certain point, and I put a methyl group there, how am I going to get that thing off? Nah, sorry, you can't get it off. You got to go back 400 million years. Okay, I'll go back 400 million years. How do I go back? I don't know how to go back. I don't know why to go back because I don't even know where I'm going towards, so I don't even know that it is a wrong methyl group. And I don't know how to go back because I never kept a laboratory notebook, so I'm lost. Synthetic reactions do not know how to stop their current course of progression or why to stop. There's no targeted goal. They don't know that they're moving toward life. Molecules are indifferent to life. They don't know that they're going in this direction. Time, although claimed to be the savior of abiogenesis, can actually be the enemy. For example, carbohydrates are kinetic products. They undergo caramelization or the Cannizzaro reaction with formaldehyde, which is a presumed prebiotic chemical. The formaldehyde plus the aldehyde will convert the formaldehyde to formic acid, and the aldehyde will reduce to the alcohol. So these things decompose. So even if you have it, it's not going to stay around very long. Prebiotic systems do not have the ability to easily purify structure. To organic chemists, if you can't purify, you're in big trouble because the impurities take up the starting material and gum up the works. They get in the way of all the processes you want to do. Free hydroxyls that are not the hydroxyls you want, go adding in there. It's a big problem. Reagent addition order is really important. You can't just add reagents in any order you want. Chemistry is very exacting. It's like baking a cake. You can't put in the icing You know, when you're making the dough, I mean, you got to wait for the icing, and the same thing in chemistry, orders of magnitude more difficult. Parameters of temperature, pressure, solvent, light, no light, pH, atmospheric gases, no gases, have to be carefully controlled to build complex systems. There's no other way around it. If people can't do it, if people can't do this, there's no way this chemistry is happening under a rock somewhere. The mass transfer problem is the killer of all roots, because when if you take a certain material, say you start with a kilo of material, you take that kilo of material, go 20 steps forward, you might have 5 milligrams of material left, and this is in a modern laboratory. Well, go back and make more. You can't, because you don't remember, you didn't keep a laboratory notebook, so you can't go back and make more. So it's a big problem. And so every time you run out of material en route to something that you don't even know you're going toward, you're dead. That's it. It kills it, because we don't keep a laboratory notebook. So let me just illustrate this with these nano cars, which we make. These are little cars. We build these little motors into them, and these spin if you shine light on them, and they'll spin unidirectionally, and that'll push these nano cars across the surface. Here's the little motor. Here's what they look like. These are very small. These are about 2 nanometers this way by 3 nanometers this way, and you can park about 50,000 of these across the diameter. That's this diameter of a human hair. Here's a nano car on a surface, and you can see it moving along. So in this synthesis of nano cars, which are very simple compared to biological system, but at least this is a nano system that's put together to do some function. Here's some of the steps that you got to go along to do this. Let's just focus in on one part of it. You know, here you're cooling it to 5 degrees, and you treat the manganese oxide. Then you cool it to -10 to -15 to make this azo species, and that's going to end up adding across this thiocarbonyl at -50, and to give the episulfide. And so we're going to read the procedure here, but you see here, this is at reflux in ethanol, so this is at 80 degrees. This is in reflux in toluene, so this is about 110 degrees. Then you're -10, then -50 degrees, and then this one's at room temperature. This one's at 60. This one's at 130 degrees. What's with all the temperature? Why all the temperature changes? Because you have to do this. If you don't do this, the chemistry doesn't work. You need different reactions for each step. You can't just throw everything together and boom, it forms. Doesn't happen that way. You got to work this way. This is the way the chemistry occurs. All right, and then we build these axles. So just take one step. Just think about the intricacies that's needed just for that one step that I had in the box. To an oven-dried 3-neck round bottom flask. It has to be dry. With the hydrazone 33 and magnesium sulfate. Hydrazone 33, a certain amount. Magnesium sulfate, a precise amount, was added. Dichloromethane. To this suspension was quickly added manganese oxide at 5 degrees. The reaction flask was immediately immersed and stirred in a cold bath ranging from -15 to -10 for an hour and a half. After this period, the reaction mixture was cooled to -50, then transferred to a Schlenk filtration tube, connected to an oven-dried 3-neck round bottom flask. The deep purple filtrate that contained the intermediate 36 was collected, and the Schlenk tube was rinsed with pre-cooled dichloromethane. I mean, this is hard stuff. You don't know how to do this. You don't know how to do that. And you have a brain. You have a mind. You don't know how to do this because you're not a trained chemist. Even for a trained chemist, this is hard. This is hard even for a trained chemist. And this procedure is abbreviated so that but a trained chemist knows different things. If I were to have to describe this for an untrained person, there'd be a lot more detail. All of this has to be done to build any complex molecule. You can't just do this under a rock. Then you have to identify it. If you don't know what you have, you don't know what you're going toward. And so you identify it. So we use these tools like NMR that dissect these things. And it's hard to do this and try to figure out these molecular structures. So here's what we have to write to convince the world that we got the structure of that molecule. Here's what we had to write. But this is not it. That was just page 1. Here's page 2 of the characterization. So in order to convince the community that we got what we got, we have to go through all this characterization. So in this one paper on nanocars, there were 281 supplemental pages of characterization data to convince the world that we got what we got. You say, well, nature doesn't use NMR. Yeah, nature uses enzymes at each step to assess molecular structure. If it's not the right structure, there's other enzymes that are called in to chop that stuff up, because if you leave the wrong structure in there, it gums up the works for the next steps. But remember, this is prebiotic. This is before enzymes. Nobody knows how this is done. Everybody's clueless. All right, so when you take a nano car, and the first nano car we made, the motor would spin at 1.8 revolutions per hour. All right, but then we learned if we pull out that sulfur ring, these are called Feringa motors, originally designed by Ben Feringa, and then we built these into the nano car. If we go to a 5-member ring now, then it spins at 3 million rotations per second. That's faster than any macroscopic motor. So small changes make a huge difference. Well, how do you do this in nature? How can nature pull out that sulfur? There's no way. Once you've inserted that, you can't extract it. That's it. So if you make something that doesn't work very well, you can't go back and fix it. And in fact, even today, there's no known method to do that. So you had to go back to step 1 in order to make this. You couldn't just take a poorly functioning thing and make it good. No, you had to go back to step 1 all over again. So that was just making the molecules. Nobody knows how to do that. Now you have to assemble them into a working system. A protocell is a self-organized, endogenously ordered spherical collection of lipids proposed as a stepping stone to the origin of life. So this is just a vesicle. If you just take oil and water and shake it up really good, you'll get these little beads, and those can be somewhat analogous to vesicles. Usually you need some higher shear, but you get some. And so people say, well, if you have that, that's essentially a cell. That's the membrane of a cell, the lipid bilayer, but let's look at some of these so-called protocell experiments. They purchase homochiral diacetyl lipids from a chemical company, or they synthesize some stereoscrambled lipids. Sometimes they might use a monoacyl lipid. Then they add those lipids to water and observe a small amount of it to form simple and expected thermodynamically driven assembly of those lipids into a synthetic bilayer vesicle upon agitation. Sometimes the researcher will add other molecules that get engulfed by the vesicles as it forms. And they publish a paper claiming that the synthetic vesicle is a protocell and suggestive of early forms of cellular life. They engage with the media to ramp it up, and the layperson says, oh, they made life, oh. No, they didn't. Cells are extremely complex. They have, there's the outside of the bilayer is different than the inside. They have lots of things going through. Without things going through, they would never work. You have to allow certain things in and allow other things out. These are proteins that allow things in. These are the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates cover the surface. These are sugars covering the surface. And these are really hard to make. You try to do carbohydrate synthetic chemistry, it is really hard. Protection, deep protection, it's just crazy hard. If you look at carbohydrates, if you just take the carbohydrate, D-pyranose, and you have 6 of these to make the hexamer, you can have over 1 trillion constitutional isomers. If you have the wrong isomer, the cell doesn't work. These are made by enzymes, and not just the original enzymes in the DNA template. These are made by other enzymes that may be functioning from other cells, come in and adjust these things to tune that cell to work. If you mess up the carbohydrate structuring, just get the wrong one, that will shut the cell down. These things, every disorder within a cell has something to do with carbohydrate dysfunction. It's very hard to have to do this. And now the origin of life, people are saying, well, you don't need such complexity. How much complexity do you need? Well, it's been calculated you need at least 256 protein coding genes. You're going to need at least 256 genes to put different proteins to put this thing together. So people, oh, no, you don't need that. You do. You do, and they just keep saying it's simpler than that. And then the rest happened by evolution. That's a bunch of nonsense. You need some level of function to have a cell, or you don't have a cell. All right, then there's the interactomes, the non-covalent interactions. The non-covalent interactions, covalent means hooked together by a chemical bond. And then there's the non-covalent interactions. These are very important. That's why when a cell is dividing, it takes information, puts it on each side, and then it clamps down and splits apart to make 2 cells. You don't dehydrate cells and get them rehydrated and get them working again. And the reason for that is the non-covalent interactions are very important for information transfer. It is estimated that the protein-protein interactions, just protein-protein, not protein-nucleic acid, not nucleic acid, just protein-protein interactions in a single yeast cell, a simple cell, of a single yeast cell. There are 10 to the 79 billion combinations, 10 to the 79 billion combinations of how those could be arranged. And only a few of those are going to work. Just to show you how big a number that is, the number of elemental particles in the universe is 10 to the 90. By elemental particles, do you mean atoms? Yeah, I could mean that. You want to mean not just atoms, you want it to mean electrons, protons, and neutrons? Okay, that's irrelevant. Whether we're talking of an atom or its 100 different components, it doesn't matter. When you're talking about numbers like this, it doesn't matter. That's 10 to the 90. This is 10 to the 79 billion. This is a crazy, crazy big number. This is a 1 with 79 billion zeros after it. That's the number of combinations, just protein-protein interactions. You get that wrong, information transfer doesn't occur. Information transfer occurs through electrostatic interactions or virtual photons that are traveling at the speed of light. You slosh one electron to the next, to the next. These are really complex within a cell. Most biologists don't even know what I just told you. They don't even know this. Yet they'll be convinced that we figured out the origin of life without even knowing the details of the complexity that's here. All right, origin of life protocell assembly is akin to buying 20 pounds of sliced turkey meat, adding a gallon of turkey broth, warming, sticking a few feathers, and suggesting that a live turkey will eventually come gobbling out if given enough time, or that a proto-turkey or extant turkey has been synthesized. That's what the nonsense is like. You think that you could just throw all this in a cell and it's going to start working? There's this huge complex order to the assembly. You can't make the molecules, but even if you could, you don't know how to put it together. You can't just take all the parts in that car and just throw it in there and it's going to work, right? You leave one screw out, it doesn't work. Critical for life is the origin of information, DNA or RNA. The information is primary. The matter that we're talking about, which is all we've talked about so far, is secondary. The information is primary. We don't even know how to get the requisite molecules, let alone the code. How do you hook these together, which is your primary code? There's much more information buried, mind you, in carbohydrates than even in DNA and RNA, in the amount of information that can be stored in sugars. Just by gazillions more information. People think, wow, DNA is amazing. Well, I'm telling you, you could put more information in carbohydrates. So and that's not limited to a single set of DNA. Other enzymes from other DNA are acting upon those carbohydrates to change it. It's amazing. This is just amazing. Try to build a cell, even hypothetically. Okay, assemble a dream team, your smartest people. And I'll give you everything you need. So I'll give you all the components, all your amino acids in homochiral form, all your DNA, all your RNA, whatever you want. I'll give you everything. Now, even if I gave you the 4 classes of chemicals in homochiral form, you wouldn't know how to hook those together. But I'll give you the DNA and the RNA all hooked together. So I'll hook it together. You want enzymes hooked together too? Okay, we'll give you any enzymes you want. So now you even have the enzymes, you have the DNA, you have the RNA. And then you have all the amino acids, everything you want. Now just assemble a cell. Go ahead, do it. You can't. You can't. And you know you can't. You wouldn't even know where to begin. You think you're going to make a vesicle and just inject all of those mixed up chemicals in there and it's going to work? You know better than that. It won't work. So even if you had all of those parts, which you have not got, you've not gotten those because remember, they're spread out. But even if I gave them to you, even if you have all those, you wouldn't know how to put it together. That's how clueless we are. You say, what about synthetic cells? In 2010, Craig Venter's group copied an existing bacterial genome and transplanted it into another cell. So in other words, you take the genome, you copy it, and then you transplant that into a cell. So you take out the existing, it's like you took the computer control chip from one car, you buy, and you take it out and you put it in another car. So if my control chip goes bad in my car, and I go to the auto parts store and I buy a new control chip and I stick that in. Can I claim that I made that car? I made it. I put in the control chip. No, I copied it. I took a copy of the same chip and I just put it in. This is what the so-called synthetic cells were. The people thought they made cells. They didn't. All right, so this is the type of nonsense that's written for students to read. Life began with little bags, I'm quoting, little bags of garbage, random assortments of molecules doing some crude kind of metabolism. That is stage one. The garbage bags grow and occasionally split into two, and the ones that grow and split fastest win. This is in a book by Regis, which is a science writer from Oxford University Press on what is life. Well, few origin of life researchers would state it so shamelessly that these are little bags of garbage, but that's precisely what origin of life people have been making, is little bags of garbage. But those little bags of garbage have no more resemblance to living cells than a big bag of garbage resembles a horse. All right, how did life begin? This is written by Nobel laureate Jack Szostak in Nature in 2018. This is in the Innovations In section, and this is to explain to the lay reader, not the experienced origin of life reader, but the lay reader of nature, which is already an elevated. Just the common person on the street doesn't read Nature. Here's what he said. The early atmosphere had no oxygen. It consisted mainly of nitrogen and carbon dioxide with smaller amounts of hydrogen, water, and methane. Okay, I'm okay with that. So by nitrogen, he probably means N2 and ammonia. Lightning, asteroid impacts, ultraviolet light from the sun acted on the atmosphere to generate hydrogen cyanide, a compound of hydrogen, carbon, and nitrogen. Okay, I'll give him that, even though he doesn't know, but we'll give him that. Raining into volcanic or crater lakes, the cyanide reacted with iron brought up by the waters circulating through the rocks. It's no idea, this is total speculation, but okay, you want that, fine. The resulting iron cyanide compounds accumulate over time, building up into a concentrated stew of reactive chemicals. Now, mind you, if you're a chemist, you know iron cyanide compounds are not that reactive. That's like a sink for cyanide. Life as we know it requires RNA. Some scientists believe that RNA emerged directly from these reactive chemicals nudged along by dynamic forces in the environment. That is a statement of utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. Nobody knows how RNA could have emerged. Nobody knows what that means. That's not a term used in synthetic chemistry. Nudged along, that's not a term used. We have no idea what that means. Jack Szostak is a Nobel laureate, smart guy, biologist. Nucleotides, the building blocks of RNA, eventually formed. Huh? How'd they do that? Eventually formed, they joined together to make strands of RNA. How'd they join together? Nucleotides don't join together. We don't know any chemistry for doing that without having, say, a DNA synthesizer where you protect, deprotect, block, unblock. This is hard to do. Nobody knows a prebiotic system that's going to easily do this, let alone the code which you need for RNA. And a oligonucleotide is not RNA. A oligonucleotide is just some random sequence. RNA is an exact sequence that has a code. That's like taking a box of letters and saying, hey, there's your book. You wanted me to write a book for you? Here's your book. That's just a box of random letters. Well, that's your book. No, it's got no information in it. That's the difference between the oligonucleotides and RNA. Once RNA was made, some strands of it became enclosed within tiny vesicles formed by spontaneous assembly of fatty acid lipids in the membranes, creating the first protocells. Again, he has absolutely no idea. RNA was made, some strands of it became enclosed, had to get enclosed in there, and formed by spontaneous assembly of fatty acid lipids into membranes, creating the first protocells. As the membranes incorporated more fatty acids, they grew and divided. At the same time, internal chemical reactions drove replication of the encapsulated DNA. No idea how that would happen. So here's the simple picture that he showed, Innovations In, that he said, these are simple sugars. They are not. This is propane trial, 1,2,3 propane trial. This is ethylene glycol. But if somebody wants to say they're sugars, you can't have it both ways. Either this is a double bond or it's not. If it's a single bond, there it is, then you can't have this. You can't say this is a double bond and this is a single bond. These are not simple sugars. These are alcohols. You want to call these cyanide derivatives? What happened to your multiple bonds? You got to have multiple bonds somewhere. Phosphate, and then they made an RNA nucleotide. So heat comes with UV light, heat and UV light will take these things and form an RNA nucleotide? No, no. And he says this is RNA, ribonucleic acid. This is RNA. That cannot be ribose because there's no stereochemistry. Without stereochemistry, that cannot be ribose. If you want to claim that's a sugar, you left out some bonds, but okay, if that's a sugar, you left out some other atoms, but okay, if you want to claim that's sugar, it can't be claimed to be ribose because it's got no stereochemistry. Here is what, the reason he said that is because Sutherland showed that he could get a nucleotide. He could get a nucleotide, but look at all the steps that he had to go through. Depending on how you count, it's about 12 steps. And these are crazy hard steps, even for experienced chemists, not under a rock type chemistry. And but does this look like heat and light will take simple sugars and make this? No. But what he says is that heat and light, so the world goes away. You can take cyanide derivatives, iron cyanide, and you can just take these and form an RNA just by heat and light? No way. You see how it's just not it's just not true. So then you go back and you look at some of Sutherland's syntheses. Well, so he wants to take this compound and make this compound. All right. So here's what he's got to do. So in this reaction, look what happens. To do this, you get all these other products. So this is what he wants to make. There's the NMR spectrum. Look at all the exactness of what he goes through. And even with all of that, in a clean laboratory, not under a rock, he gets not this, but he gets all of this junk too. Look at all this other stuff. And then you'd say, okay, well, then what he does is he purifies this out and he uses this and he carries it on the next step. No. There's the other thing that they don't talk about, is they will take the mixtures and they'll say, we made what we wanted. Now, we didn't bother purifying it and taking it away from that so that we could, we just bought pure 1,2,3 propane triol, and then we carried that on to the next step. But whoa. You mean you bought that and you carried it on? You didn't carry on what you made? Well, no, that's just a technicality. Well, that's just a technicality. How many syntheses do you think are done that way in an organic laboratory? I mean, you could just buy the final product if you wanted to, and then you want to go ahead and start making these sorts of things and say you made it. And so it's built on a house of cards, the whole thing. You didn't really take that and carry it on. Well, the separation's really hard. Yeah, you bet it's hard, even with your advanced high-pressure liquid chromatography. And you leave it to somehow in a prebiotic earth under a rock or in a cave, it's going to purify? So here's my colleague. My colleague who's not an he's just a really good synthetic chemist. And he has no horse in this race. But I showed him this article of Sostek. I said, what do you think? He says, this is one of the worst one I have read in a while. Sostek is weaving a story based on pure conjecture and wishful thinking, definitely not worthy of a publication in a journal like Nature. He provides no references for the processes that are well, quote unquote, well understood. He uses the term scientists believe based on no evidence whatsoever. In summary, this article is junk. Again, I didn't write this. I am astonished that he, as a Nobel laureate, can just gloss over chemical details. Are you the only one calling these guys out? That's what he wrote. All right, look at the exquisite exactness that is put into this chemistry to get these things to go. So when you read this, everything is just exquisite. And then they'll get the compound, and then they say, well, we didn't really use it. We just scaled it up to simplify the handling procedures using normal synthetic organic methods. Well, why didn't you use what you made? Because it was a little blip in your HPLC and you claimed it without purifying it or without really using that reaction? Then you went ahead and scaled it up another way, or you bought it? That's cheating. Look at this exactness. The preparation of cyanoacetylene on copper 1 was suggested as a way to conveniently prepare and store it for use when needed. Here's how it was made. So what I'm talking about for you non-chemists here, we're just talking about cyanoacetylene. That one compound, to make that one little compound, that one right there, look at what he had to go through. Copper chloride was mixed with potassium chloride to generate the Newland catalyst at 70 degrees centigrade. Then a separately generated source of acetylene gas was prepared from calcium carbide. Where do you get all this calcium carbide? He bought it. Where do you get potassium chloride? He bought it. Where do you get copper 1 chloride? He bought it. This gas was bubbled through a Newland catalyst to prepare acrylonitrile. All right, so he's bubbling this gas through, and that's an unstable compound that needs proper isolation and storage. Acrylonitrile is nasty, which was then treated with KCN, potassium cyanide, for 1 hour. Then 5 equivalents of ammonia as a 13-molar ammonium solution adjusted to pH 9.2 with sodium hydroxide to generate the desired aminopropionitrile. All of the reactions were executed in separate clean vessels. Oh, find that under a rock. And properly isolated prior to proceeding to the next reaction. Yeah, you properly isolated, you properly purified before bringing it on. This is just a sampling of the preparations, okay? And all the other things he made were racemic and not chiral anyway. Then he goes on to even higher level extrapolations that, quote, all the cellular subsystems could have arisen simultaneously through common chemistry. Oh, crazy! This is crazy. You're probably just falling out of your chairs right now. That all cellular subsystems could have arisen simultaneously through common chemistry? Where on earth did you get that statement? That's quoting from Nature Chemistry, one of the highest chemistry journals around. And that has raised the level of supposition from mere molecule types to now complex cellular subsystems? You're going to make a whole cellular subsystem where molecules are working in concert toward a common goal? Give me a break. How close have researchers come to making an artificial cell? Well, in November 2018, there was this article published in Science, which is a top journal. Biologists create the most lifelike artificial cells. I was like, wow, I want to see that. I want to see that with the most lifelike artificial cells. So I go to the original article. Here's the original article, communication and quorum sensing in non-living mimics of eukaryotic cells. So they're saying they've made non-living mimics, but they're communicating in quorum sensing. Ooh. They took semi-porous microcapsules made of plastics. They're made of plastics from acrylate polymerization containing clay. You put clay in it because clay is positively charged. It'll bind DNA, which is negatively charged. We're prepared using modern microfluidics techniques. So you do this in a fabrication facility. Fabrication facility is like it's like a shop where you build computer chips with all of these different tools. And then clays have a high affinity bonding DNA. So when DNA was present, so you take these plastic spheres, you make plastic spheres, you put clay in there, but they're semi-porous. So then you throw in some DNA. The DNA is going to diffuse through the semi-porous membrane and stick to the clay. Okay, all right. Then they buy ribosomes, mRNA, messenger RNA, enzymes, and reagents. These were either purchased or isolated from living things. And then they add the medium. And the expected chemical reactions ensue. You get protein synthesis. And the newly formed proteins then diffuse out and go into other microcapsules. It's just normal diffusion. The microcapsules that are closer to that first one get more because they're near. The ones that are further away get less. And they're calling that quorum sensing. That is just normal diffusion. The ones that are close get more. The ones that are further away get less. If you're standing in a swimming pool and somebody pours in 10 gallons of boiling water, you're going to feel that. But the person on the other side of the swimming pool isn't going to feel that 10 gallons of water getting poured in the opposite corner. Why? Because of diffusion. The chemistry of forming proteins in this way is done all the time in industry, in test tubes. It's done all the time. This is far from the press-hyped claim of gene expression and communication rivaling that of living cells. You can buy a kit to do this. You can buy a kit. You just mix these things in a kit and it does this. This is quorum sensing. This is the most lifelike artificial cells. What that underscores is, yeah, that's the most lifelike, which means you're nowhere close. That's what it means. I just got this a couple of weeks ago. Dear Mr. Tour, this is an email that was sent to me. I meet with a number of men, and I've been showing your videos on how outlandish proofs or anything is. But this article was thrown out there as proof that it could be possible. Could you point me to a critique of this article? It would be of a great help. Thank you. Well, I don't want to do critiques for everybody, but I clicked on this to see what was said. Here's the article. Comes out, researchers solve puzzle of origin of life on Earth. Whoa, they solved it. They did. It says it right there. Researchers solved puzzle of origin of life on Earth. And it's not just in Scientific Daily. It was in a bunch of other journals too. It came out. So I went to the article and I read it. Prebiotic amino acids bind to and stabilize prebiotic fatty acid membranes. Huh? This is a portion of the abstract. He takes a vesicle, and you add certain things, and the organic compounds, some of the organic compounds go in that vesicle and help to stabilize it. They help to stabilize it from high concentrations of magnesium. And that solved the origin of life? Well, that's what was written. So I contacted one of the authors here, and I said, could you help me out here? How did this do this? So I'm not going to comment on that right now because after pushing and pushing, first he said he would comment, and then he learned who I was. He says, I'm not going to talk to you about this. I said, this is, why wouldn't you talk to me about this? So he says, it'll take some time for me to answer your questions. It was very simple questions, but he wanted some time. He said he'll do it this coming weekend. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But here's what it is. People take a little idea of trash. It's a trashy idea that they find a little bit of something on a meteorite, or they make a little bit of some scrambled something in a laboratory. And somebody says, oh, so you see that's been made, so I'll build upon that. And that gives it a little more trash. And then I'll build upon that, and I'll build upon that. And all of a sudden they extrapolate to life. It's all based on a house of cards on top of another house of cards on top of another one. They don't even purify the chemicals going along, but those people don't know it because they haven't read the articles. Or they'll look at the meteorite and it's all scrambled garbage. And I look at some of the ancient, like 35-year-old, one of the meteorite articles was sent to me by the author of that paper who said he's going to get to me over the weekend. It's a 35-year-old paper. And you look at it, and that was the extraction from the meteorite. Did you watch your chloroform? Did that chloroform have a little bit of a sugar in it to begin with? I mean, did anyone breathe on that chloroform? If anyone breathed on it, that could be where the sugar came from, where the carbohydrate came from. And if you guys didn't breathe it, how about the manufacturer where it came from? Did somebody happen to sneeze in the factory that day when the chloroform was being made? I mean, how scrupulous you got to be to have, I didn't say inscrupulous, how scrupulous you have to be in the care in trying to find a little bit of something on a meteorite when you have Earth where life is ubiquitous. This stuff's hard to do. All right, it's fool's gold. It's fool's gold because if you take chemists were trying to make gold from other elements, and they found that you could take iron, and if you added sulfur to it, you would get what looked like gold. And now they knew it wasn't gold because it didn't have the same ductility, it didn't have the same melting point, but they thought they were getting close. No, you can add sulfur all day to iron, you're never going to get gold. The only way you'll convert iron into gold is you got to change the number of protons. And that's hard to do. You need some nuclear reactor system, and that costs a lot more than gold. And so this is what they're doing. They'll find a little something and they say, okay, well, why are you bothering us? Let us do our research. We're on the right track. You're not on the right track. You're making fool's gold. This is why it has to stop. In 1775, the French Academy in Paris refused to entertain any further proposals for perpetual motion machines. The devices just didn't work as advertised. The mature science of thermodynamics, which gave us a theoretical account for why the perpetuum mobile schemes failed, lay 100 years in the future. Likewise, origin of life researchers seem sadly adrift, and its inability to advance bears witness of that fact. So I think there's a time for a call. We need a timeout. A change is warranted. The demands addressing the hurdles, such as the origin of life's code, routes to the complex assembly and interactomes that are essential, mass throughput, lots of questions, or some conjectures as to why these things don't need to be addressed. Have so-called scientific facts ever been shown to be wrong? Okay, so so-called scientific facts, have they ever been shown to be wrong before? Well, does the universe have a beginning? If prior to the 1960s, lots of science, in the 1950s, the majority of scientists believed the universe had no beginning. It always existed. That scientific fact quote unquote fact changed in 1964 with the steady state theory replaced the steady state theory was replaced by the Big Bang theory. Darwinian theory to punctuated equilibrium. The scientific fact changed in 1972. Eldridge and Gould proposed that the degree of gradualism commonly attributed to Charles Darwin is virtually non-existent in the fossil record. So that changed in 1972. Climate change killed off dinosaurs. That scientific quote-unquote fact changed in 1980 when it became due to an asteroid impact. That's the Alvarez hypothesis. Random mutation and natural selection, as suggested by Darwin and taught as fact, are recognized by many evolutionists since the 1990s to be insufficient to account for the complexity of life. These things that people my age learned, that random mutation, natural selection account for life, it's a bunch of nonsense that many evolutionists now feel. That its neutral drift is quantitatively more important in understanding genetic differences between organisms. Just the normal drift change between me and my children and their children and so forth. All right, how long ago did dinosaurs become extinct? Or better to say, how stable is soft tissue? One of these has changed. Scientific fact is being questioned since 2007 when Mary Higbee Schweitzer, a paleontologist at NC State, led the group that discovered the remains of blood cells in dinosaur fossils and later discovered soft tissue remains from Tyrannosaurus rex specimens. In 2015, researchers reported finding structures similar to blood cells and collagen fibers preserved in the bone fossils of 6 Cretaceous dinosaur specimens, which are approximately 75 million years old. 75 million years old, and you're finding blood cells and collagen fibers. That tells us that at least soft tissue hangs around a long, long time, something we never thought about before, or scientists or dinosaurs did not become extinct until more recently. One of the two. One can think of these being thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, maybe 100,000 years, but 75 million years old is hard. It's hard. So these things, so facts, things that are put forward as facts that aren't, are always subject to change. Claims that mislead the patient taxpayer are unhelpful, and the public will eventually distrust scientific claims. Let me see something. Uncorrected or unfounded assertions jeopardize science beyond a singular field, especially since there's mounting distrust of higher education in general. Condescending comments toward the public or student, if they will not embrace our conjectures as facts, will lead to continued division between scientists and non-scientists, which can yield public reluctance to fund our research. We must tell the truth with specificity. If it's a fact, say it. If it's not a fact, say it. Blackballing scientists if they bear legitimate nonconformist views by excluding them from professional societies and academies, withholding their funding or denying them tenure is anti-scientific and will retard the advancement of science. So I'm not one for God of the gaps. As a scientist, I would never say that we will never understand the origin of life. One day, in the distant future, we might understand life's origin and evolution of complex systems. That will not lessen God, but we will see him as all the more magnanimous. But until that time, we can't go on saying that we understand these things. As a scientist, I can say, I can never say we will never know. I can't say that. We might know someday, but as of right now, we are clueless. Scientific fact versus the Bible. So now I'm getting away from the science part. We talk about scientific fact in the Bible. A scientific fact, water has 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. That will be the same throughout the universe, and that will never change. There's never been discordance between scientific facts and statements in the Bible. So there's no need to reconcile them. So-called scientific facts, which are really theories, are constantly changing, even on the order of decades, and certainly on the order of a century. So trying to twist the Bible to fit a scientific theory is a frustrating endeavor. All of those so-called facts that changed were all in the last 60 years. Do not let professors with their bold claims of facts upset you. Theories or conjectures are not facts, but unfortunately and shamefully, many professors themselves do not make the necessary distinction. This leads to the confusion of generations of students and even professors themselves. Many professors are confused because they think that somebody understands that. No, if they really looked into the origin of life, they'd see nobody understands. To the student who's inundated with misinformation, Deuteronomy 13, verses 3 and 4 tells us, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is the Lord your God you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him, serve him, and hold fast to him. Many people are dreamers in this, and so much of what's said is just a bunch of storytelling. These are dreamers. You're not to listen to them. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you really love him with all your heart and with all your soul. He's testing you. I pray you pass the test. I'm going to close with this, because in a group of this size, this is my last slide, group of this size, I never assume anything for where people are with Jesus Christ. But let me say this about God. He says, even I am the one who wipes out your transgressions for my own sake, and I will not remember your sins. God invites you. The message of the gospel is come. He invites you. He says, I will forgive your sins for my own sake. What is this for my own sake? I will wipe out your transgressions for my own sake. And I liken it to this. If one of my kids went to jail, I would go and bail them out. And even if they said, Dad, I deserve to be here, I would say, you're my child. You're getting out. We'll deal with that, but I'm not going to leave you here. Some people think that they're not worthy of so gracious a salvation. God said, I'm doing it for my own sake. I love you so much. I'm taking you out of that. Romans 10:9 says this, that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. This is what the scriptures say, salvation, that if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is Lord, we are sinners that are separated because of our sin. There's nothing we can do to get past that. So God provided a way. He provided a way in his Son. His Son died for our sins on our behalf. That does away with our sins. He rose from the dead, and he's seated at the right hand of his Father. Many people saw him. He was seen by over 500 people at one time. He ate with his disciples. He ate with them. He talked with them. He instructed them. He invited them to feel his hands and his feet. He invited them to stick his finger in the holes in his hands, lest you think it was an imposter acting like Jesus. No, this guy, he still had the holes in his hands from the crucifixion. He still had a hole in his side from where a spear was driven right up into his heart. And he told Thomas, he didn't ask him. He told Thomas, he said, Thomas, stick your hand into the hole in my side. He told him to. So he invited him to stick his hand into a hole in his side and just reach up there and feel that hole. This was really Jesus risen from the dead. We must believe in the resurrection. Now, I'll tell you something. I share with people all the time about Jesus and his resurrection. And I have a 10-minute conversation with them, 15-minute conversation with them. They go from not believing in the resurrection. These are all educated people. I only speak to educated people because that's who I'm around. They go from not believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ to believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ in a 15 or 20-minute conversation. These are educated people. How do they go from not believing to believing? They haven't had time to investigate the history of this. I have since then. There's a lot of it. But how can a person go from not believing to believing in a simple, short conversation? These are educated people. These are either undergraduates at Rice or graduate students or postdocs or professors or medical students or medical professors from across the street all the time. Every week I see somebody go from not believing to believing, somebody receiving the kindness of the Lord Jesus in salvation. How does this done? How do they go from not believing to believing? And I'll tell you, I think it's because the truth of the resurrection is already on your heart. It's already there. The barrier would be way too high for us to believe something so incredible as a resurrection and make that a requirement for salvation if God didn't place the truth of it already there. The truth of the resurrection is already there. Whether you're listening to this live or you listen to the recording of this, I invite you to send me an email if you do not know the Lord. This is not for Christians. This is not for people who already know Jesus. So don't send me an email and say, well, can you meet with me anyway? My answer will be no. This is only for people who do not know the Lord, but you want to hear more. I invite you into a Zoom conversation, just me and you alone. Send me an email to tour@rice.edu, tour@rice.edu, or just Google Jim Tour. My name will come up. You'll find my email. Google me, and I will email me, and I will set up a Zoom conversation. Just me and you will meet. 30 minutes, I will share my story, and in 30 minutes, you will walk out a believer in Jesus Christ, saved. You will. Because I've seen it over and over again. I invite you to do that. And with that, I'm going to close, and I thank you for inviting me. I went a bit over time, but I didn't go over time if you look at the time that you gave me to start. So I stayed within the time that you had allotted to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tour. That definitely generated a lot of excitement, interest in the chat. We've got some questions. I totally agree. We got to later start with some of the introductions. They were very nice, but you're doing great. Thank you. And for all those who are staying with us, we really appreciate it. So if you have a few more moments, we would like to address some of the questions that have popped up in the Q&A. And one of my colleagues, David Novak, who's a biochemist, has one of the most upvoted questions. So it's a phrase that he has shared with me a few times, and I would like to see if we can, I'll just ask the question. It's many, if not all, chemical reactions in the cell are simultaneously at non-equilibrium states. Is there any research that demonstrates that you can have multiple simultaneous non-equilibrium reactions in a single reaction chamber that's at homeostasis?
No. And also that the amount of energy to keep a cellular system in a non-equilibrium state is enormous. Enormous amount of energy to keep things in a non-equilibrium.
Does someone want to come in, or I just put the second video on the screen? I'll wait a couple of minutes, and otherwise, if nobody wants to come in, I'll put another video on.
Before we try to explain how life began, we need...
Hi, Gavin.
Hi. Okay. How's my sound?
Okay. You.
Yeah, I've just got a...
Hi, Jungle Jargon. How are you?
Shalom, Jungle. Shalom.
Shalom. Is it working? It's actually working?
Yes, we can hear you.
My live stream. My connection is working.
I can hear you clearly. I can hear you clearly, Jungle.
Okay. See how long it lasts.
So, Gavin, did you have your debate with Mike? Yeah. Can you hear me, Gavin? I think.
Yes,
I can hear
I can hear you. Artangelo, can you hear
Did
me?
you have?
Arten-
Yes, we can hear you.
Sure.
Did you have your debate with Mike?
You just cut out on me, Artangelo, sorry.
Yes. Did you have your debate with Mike?
Mike.
With
Speed.
speed sound, yes.
Not yet, but I would be happy to. I'd be happy to. And even on your channel, I'd be happy to if you were moderating.
Yeah, whatever is fine for you guys. For me, it's okay.
Sure. I'll get hold of Mike. But I've got a question, Artangelo, for you and basically anyone else in the chat. I'll try and say it as simply as I can. The evolutionists, they use these time frames of millions of years, which is fine because it suits their narrative, but they never ever speak about the second law of thermodynamics. Now, we all know that nothing escapes the second law of thermodynamics. So I'm just wondering why this is just overlooked by evolutionists, because for their model to work, they employ this long time frame. But the second law of thermodynamics works every second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So wouldn't that be a defeater for the evolutionary process?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so too. Yeah. Well, I think Dr. Tour points this out when he's talking about going back to step one, and you know what I mean? How they're skipping, they're skipping steps because you can't maintain these molecules for vast amounts of time. Even if you made something, you can't keep it there for millions of years. And I think he's pointing that out rather clearly. But yeah,
Right.
they don't point it out because I think it's devastating for their idea.
Well, see, that's the thing. They need millions and millions of years. At least that's what they think. But they don't even have millions of years because there's so many indications of a young Earth. And more.
You also got to
All the
remember
time.
is that they have these presuppositions that the millions of years already happened, and now they look at the world, they see order, they see life, they see, you know what I mean? They see order in the universe, so they're assuming that millions and millions of years has led to all the order we see in the universe. So you know what I mean? So I think that it's their presuppositions that kind of is why they work.
Right. They never did in the past, so why would it do it over millions of years? They're just hoping against hope.
Did I ask what you're going to debate Speed on? Or what's his name? What's his name?
Mike.
Well, yeah. What were you going to debate on?
Yeah, it's better to call him Mike.
Mike. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Mike. M-I-K-E.
What were you going to debate on?
So, Kevin, I don't get what you mean by the relation of the second law of thermodynamics and evolution. Can you a little bit expose what you mean that it doesn't favor evolution?
Well, okay. Artangelo, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I do know that once something is born or once something it grows, it's subject to entropy or degradation because of that second law of thermodynamics. So I can't square a millions of years time frame for something to evolve, i.e. fish to fisherman, when that second law of thermodynamics affects everything and would degrade every step of the evolutionary process. That's as kind of simple as I can make it.
I agree. I agree in the sense that the second law of thermodynamics also degrades information. So you can apply it to that because when you have mutations, it is degradation of information. The information content becomes less. And of course you can have an advantage of fitness through degradation of information, but what we don't see is an increase of information, which increases as well fitness. That is very rare. Maybe we have.
You can't get the information there to begin with.
We might have it up to 1 or 2 mutations maximum, but in order to fix just 2 mutations, you need 100 billion years. So that is that is maybe the limit or so. More than that is not possible. But we know that what constructs organisms and complex organismal complexity and architecture is not the information just in the genome, but especially and mainly epigenetic information of various kinds. There are over 20, I list 23, 24 different epigenetic codes and languages, which are all involved in orchestrating organismal complexity and body form. So that is basically what really substitutes Darwin's theory of natural selection and mutations.
So, Tangelo, I agree with you. However, we never hear evolutionists or the evolutionary theory. We never hear we never hear talk, or we never hear inference to the second law of thermodynamics in their model.
I could respond to what I could say what they say, Gavin. They say, well, entropy only applies to a closed system, and the Earth is an open system, and it's fed with energy by the sun, for example. That's usually their response, Gavin.
I think it is important that whatever you say, especially when you have a debate with an atheist, that you are able, whatever you say, to back it up with scientific papers which confirm what you are saying. Otherwise, you will not have credibility.
Sure. I understand, Tangelo. But does not science agree that the Earth is a closed system because the entire universe is a closed system?
Yeah, but they'll say that the Earth, just if you could draw a circle around any system, basically. So you could just draw your circle.
Well, locally you have obviously an injection of energy from the sun.
Sure.
And the Earth is not a closed system just because of that. So I think you need to be careful in bringing up the second law of information, because what you want to challenge is the fact that the genome and the information content in the genome degrades. And this is a fact through entropy. Yeah. And it is true as well that information degrades to the laws of thermodynamics. That is true as well. But as I said, if I would be you, and if you want to challenge the theory of evolution, and if you just want to say, well, the theory of evolution is not true, then there are Sanford and so forth. There are good Collins. There are good papers which mention entropy. There is Behe as well, and you can use that. But what you will see is all the time is creationists telling atheists or evolutionists why evolution is not true and why it doesn't work. But what you rarely will find is someone pointing out what replaces the evolutionary theory. And I've put a link in the chat, which is my article on that topic, where I demonstrated that there are about 18 different mechanisms which are involved in organismal development. And of course, if you want to say that an organism can morph its physiological form from one kind or phenotype to the other, then you need to point out in the first place what actually the mechanisms are that form that organism, that form, that architecture. And then you can say, These are the mechanisms which are involved in organismal development and form. And then, of course, these are the same mechanisms that need to change in order for you to go from one architecture to the other.
Right. Show us the factory. Show us the template, but it just goes in one area and out the other. You know, it takes. I mean, you can't get the information there to begin with, and then you can't maintain it.
Yeah, Jungle. I'm hearing Jungle and Daniel. I'm hearing what Atangelo is saying. It's easy to say, look, there's so many holes in evolution, it can't be a viable theory. But then I have to say, it's not a viable theory because of this, and then present an argument, i.e., the second law of thermodynamics degrades the degrades information. Yeah, degrades.
Did you know?
What we need to know is that what builds organismal form is not information only stored in the genome. You can, in a figurative way, see the information in the genome like a library. And there you have many genes which you can, as an analogy, see as books. Now, what you need is also the orchestration of gene expression, which is done by the gene regulatory network. And of course, the orchestration is partially, yes, it is also stored in the genome, okay, and also the molecules which turn the genes on and off, they are also encoded in the genome. But there is a lot of information which is not stored in the genome, like, for example, the histone code, which is stored in histones, in the histone tail, and also the chromatin dance, the location of the chromosomes inside of the nucleus of the cell. And there is also the glycan code on the surface of the membranes, which also are involved. And in special, there are many signaling pathways which are also involved in that orchestration. So there are many epigenetic factors which are involved. And if you want to change the organismal form, then you have to change as well the information in these epigenetic languages and in these signaling pathways. And so some secular scientists, they acknowledge this. They are going in this direction. Like, for example, the third way. These are scientists which challenge the traditional, the modern synthesis and so forth.
Yeah, but they challenge it, but they don't. When you say they challenge it, I mean, from what I could glean on it, is that
they of course they are atheists as well, so they will never point to a creator. But they will at least say it's not only genetic information which defines organismal complexity. They will admit that epigenetic information is as well relevant in regards of organismal development and architecture.
Aren't they saying, though, and to just be pushed back, wouldn't they just say that they're looking to make a more robust theory of evolution and adding these mechanisms to what's already there?
Well, the problem is that you need prescribed and in the first place injected information right from the beginning to make these organismal forms. And you need as well, right at the beginning, even when life starts, mechanisms of adaptation of the life form to the environment. Otherwise, the organism will die very fast. And we know science knows what these mechanisms are, like heat shock proteins, for example. Like if, for example, an organism goes from one environment to a different one where it encounters a completely different environment with different temperatures, that eventually will damage proteins. And there are signaling pathways which recognize when a protein is damaged, and they will eventually turn on signaling pathways which will then turn on proteins which are adapted for that kind of environment. But that is information which has to be pre-programmed right from the beginning.
Yeah, see, this is the approach that I started to take lately. Is because evolution is like to skip over a lot of things and just point to like adaptation basically. But I like to say evolution can't even really. It's dead. An organism is dead before it could even evolve, because the most simplex organism we know about is irreducibly complex. Like, you can't build it step by step. It's not possible. You need multiple things all together at once. It's like it has to be there, or it's not alive.
Yes, I use as a prime example of irreducible complexity, which is a true evolution killer, photosynthesis, and in special the make of chlorophylls, which are absolutely essential to capture light, and also the oxygen evolving complex, which splits water and then as a waste product produces oxygen, and that water oxygen complex, that oxygen evolving complex, uses 4 proteins, and I can demonstrate that they have made knockout experiments, and they did remove each of the 4 proteins which are involved in that function. And when they remove each of those, then the function ceases to work. And these proteins, they do not have any function by their own.
I got a good question. You just talked about the splitting of the water molecule.
Yes.
I do that in my experiments, but it takes a lot of energy. How does it do that in biology?
It is a 5-step process, and I cannot go into details now, but I can give you a paper, and you can look it up. It is not fully understood how it. The last step of the process, of the 5th step in the process, is not fully understood how it works. But
the reason why I'm saying that is because whoever can figure that out can make a lot of money, because you can make hydrogen from water, and from the hydrogen you can make fuel cells, cars.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can figure out how to split the water molecule, make hydrogen and oxygen, you can make a lot of money.
Let me see. Yeah, I have it here. I will show you guys what I'm talking about. And the oxygen evolving complex here, it has a metal core and uses also molybdenum, and that core is absolutely essential in the reaction, and it's extremely complex to synthesize. And the question, of course, is how do you make that core? By evolutionary manner, and they do not have an explanation for that.
Yeah,
right. I would like to understand. I gotta do some experiments on how to do that, because if I'm able to do that, I could make hydrogen to run fuel cell cars.
Well, you could do it, Jargon. The problem is it's not efficient. So I mean, you can.
That's what I'm saying. But I know that in biology it doesn't take as much energy as what it does when I use a lot of electricity.
Didn't they say like photosynthesis is almost like 100% efficient?
Yeah, it's extremely efficient. Just
I heard that. Like,
the
almost
fact that you can eat starch and run and do work is astounding.
Yeah, like think about what we could do if we eat, like, have a cup of coffee and a donut. Like all the work we could get. It's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, let me read that to you guys. The oxygen evolving complex is composed of a cluster of manganese, calcium, and chloride ions bound to the extrinsic proteins. In cyanobacteria, there are 5 extrinsic proteins, and in plants, there are only 3. Maintenance of the highly dynamic cluster also requires the delivery of a constant supply of the proper levels of manganese and calcium. Now, here, I list here the proteins, and here, the first one, that manganese stabilizing protein is known to be essential for photosystem 2, extrinsic subunit for stabilization and retention of the manganese. And I don't know which one this is, cofactor. That is one of those. And here the second one, both the regulators that are necessary for biogenesis of optically active photosystem 2. Then here is the third one. Is also necessary, the regulators which are necessary for the biogenesis of the activity of the photosystem 2. Okay, so you have here essential proteins which are involved in water splitting, and of course you have the manganese cluster which plays an essential role in the water oxidation mechanism. So this is, in my understanding, an irreducibly complex system. Science has absolutely no understanding of its origin. You can check, you can make a research, and experts on the field like Blankenship, they say that science has absolutely no clue and understanding how the oxygen photosynthetic pathway could have evolved.
Right. Because if they could understand it, there'd be somebody making hydrogen and oxygen from water right now.
Yeah, that means evolution. Of course, they cannot reproduce what we see on a molecular scale. But my inference based on this is that means evolutionary intermediates are non-functional. As we can see, there is a precise fit and size matching of the residues with the individual atoms of the clusters. How was this precision achieved? By trial and error. If you don't have the exact and precise configuration of this extremely complex cluster, you do not have the split of water. Here are the 5 stages which I talked about, and the last stage, they do not know how it works.
Why would these systems, like you said, trial and error? It's useless unless it works.
Yes, exactly.
Systems like organize themselves for no reason. It's just
if they knew how.
And the cluster must be positioned at the very exact, precise location in the middle of the proteins in order for the reaction to occur. And this is finely orchestrated. This is not something that you can just put somehow there and then it will start to work. No, these are bound, the cluster is bound at precise residues, amino acid residues of the proteins on the surrounding, which then in that precise position, it is able to work.
It's all those proteins are splitting water. It takes all that to split.
The reaction, yeah. Here is the cycle. Here is the cycle, and they don't know the fourth step, which they don't know how it happens, how it occurs. That is
they probably wouldn't even say. Even if they knew, they wouldn't say.
I mean, it's amazing. Maybe. Come on, it's what kind of baffles me. Like,
okay, here that is the structure of the cluster.
Atheists must drive abiogenesis because this is just unfathomable. How you could think this by accident.
Guys, look at the structure, at the architecture of that cluster. And now think that each of these atoms must be at the precise exact location in order for that cluster to be functional. And if it's not there, do you know what happens? There would be no advanced life forms on Earth. So this thing here, that's where we can say, hey, thank you that you are there, because otherwise we would not exist.
Right. We wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for that.
No advanced life form would be here because oxygenic photosynthesis is essential to make glucose and to make advanced life forms.
But there's so many steps. I mean, that's just one step. and we wouldn't be here. There's hundreds of
I don't
things.
I don't want to even go into how about the biosynthesis pathway to make that thing here. It's extremely complex, and you need chaperones which put the pathway, the proteins which are involved. It directs them through the biosynthesis pathway, and there are scaffold proteins which make that cluster, and there are several proteins involved in this. And if you have just the cluster, but you do not have the 4 or 5 surrounding proteins, this cluster has no function at all.
Yeah.
So this is an all or nothing business. Either it's all there at once, or you do not have the process which splits water and as waste product makes oxygen.
This is just one thing we could point to. But that's why I think you could say evolution is dead before it even begins. It doesn't, like, we don't have to. I think anything past this is just noise, like phylogenetic charts and all that. It's just noise. They need all
I've been
that.
saying for years.
Now think about this:
that everything falls apart at a much greater rate, faster rate than it ever supposedly puts itself into directed working order. It never puts itself into order. And
now think about this: that this is just one part of over 25 extremely complex macromolecule complexes which have to be interconnected all together in order for the photosynthesis pathway to go all through. And if you don't have just one of the proteins like Rubisco, for example, then the whole photosynthesis pathway is not functional.
You know, people should be bowing down and worshiping the Creator if they see it, in all honesty. You know.
I can, if you guys want, I made a video on oxygenic photosynthesis and the pathway to make chlorophylls. And I mean, any honest researcher and which wants to know what the truth is will have to admit that what I will demonstrate is an evolution killer.
Yeah, but you say that, Antangelo, and I agree with you. And most, I think all the creationists would agree with you, but something in the mind of the atheist, like secularist person, I don't know what it is. I don't know if they just can't see it, they refuse to see it, they're in denial of it. I don't know what it is, but it seems like nothing is good enough when you tell them.
Yeah, I would like really that Mike, which is in the chat, would come in or would explain. I mean, I have in a month or so shared so much information at my channel and at his channel, and he is simply in a state of denial and says, oh, it's a young earth creationism, it's 6,000 years. You need to stop to talk about this bullshit and so forth, because
and
we
the
know
evidence
it's wrong,
shows.
you know?
Yeah,
and
the evidence is showing a 6,000-year-old creation. All the evidence supports that.
How about some honesty about this stuff, though? Just look at it and be like, yeah, that seems rather implausible. Like, just be honest about it. Like, I could deal with honesty, but not this just wave handing, like, oh yeah, well, and making up stories about millions of years.
Hey, I will make a challenge here to any atheist or proponent of evolution which listens to this stream now. Provide me one plausible explanation of how the oxygenic photosynthesis pathway could have evolved, and I will turn myself to a proponent of evolution.
Wow. That's you hear that? What's his name, Mike? That's a worthwhile pursuit, you would think.
Yeah, you would think. There's so many people with an IQ of 150 or more, and where are they? They're all quiet. They all never looked into it. They don't know what the facts are.
In the same sense as the Royal Society in London gives a price of $10 million for someone that can provide a mechanism which is not intelligent to demonstrate how information can emerge randomly without intelligence. In the same sense, I will launch that challenge to any a proponent of evolution.
Yeah.
Demonstrate
10
to me
million.
a pathway, an evolutionary pathway to come to get oxygenic photosynthesis, and I will say that I will start to be a proponent of evolution.
And you know what? This is what I'm talking about with Mike before. Here he is. He could tell us
What's
himself.
up, John Maddox? Hey, Speed, what's up?
Hi, Mike.
I want to know his ideas about this information just forming from heat or something. I want to hear this, how this equates to the specified information we're talking about in DNA.
I think Speed's got an IQ of 150, right?
Well, let's stop with that. I don't like that kind of comments, John.
Hey, I'm afraid those numbers suck.
Stop. Let's stop attacking people. Let's just discuss the science. Okay.
I have a serious question. You said he brought something up with heat or something. Heat could create information.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you tease that out for me?
Yeah. If you put if basically energy in the cell creates allows it to create more complex molecules. That's basically how life works. So energy goes in. You take energy in the form of carbohydrates, you break it down. The ATP is then used in chemical reactions.
Wait, can I stop you right there? I'm talking about the origins of information. That's what I thought you were referring to, Speed. You already got cells and stuff going on. I'm just talking. I thought you meant heat can create information by itself. I didn't know you were talking about you have cells and these systems full of information already. That's what I thought you were saying. So I'm sorry if I misrepresented what you said.
Okay, there are theories about very, very early hydrogen gradients that existed possibly in little microcells in clay in black smokers. I forget who it is. I'd have to go drag the books. I just woke up, guys, so go slow. And you can call me Speed instead of Mike. I actually prefer that. But anyway, so the energy from the hydrogen gradient, which happens in a number of different ways, allows a chemical reaction to happen. And what happens is overall there's an increase in entropy overall in the system, but that does not mean that there couldn't be an increase in the complexity of the molecule. So when two molecules join together for some reason, they'll create a more complex molecule. Overall, if you were to measure the entropy of the entire reaction, it would always increase. That's just the way things work. So so that's how complexity is built.
I thought we were talking about information like that. That's the distinction on mute. Like a molecule by itself, like H2O. That's not the information I'm talking about.
Okay. So molecules, depending on where they are, like in DNA, you have the 4 nucleotides. The way they are hooked together, that is a kind of information. There, you go from an A to a U to an A to an A to an A to a C. That's how that's basically how, that's where the information is, right? It's how the molecule is arranged in space.
Yeah,
that would be information.
Sure. It's not how they're bonded though, but the order, sure.
Yeah, the order, and it's also a chemical bond. So there's chemical
bonded. I'm saying it's the order, like kind of like how we put letters in an order to make words.
Right. Yeah, and that you can call information. Now you have to be careful when you look at that information about how you interpret it. In the cell, obviously, it's going to be interpreted in the form of proteins and RNAs that are going to be created from it. But there's more than that. There's also information in, for instance, if a gene, if you have 10 genes together, in close proximity, and then you have a big long space. Okay, well, that space will wrap around a histone. It's called. It's like a little thimble, and that space is also information because you need that space. Because whatever is in that space is not going to turn into proteins for that particular cell type.
I feel like you're agreeing with us now. I feel like we're all on the same page then.
Well, yeah, information is how life works, basically. Life is an information machine. It not only, I mean, it accumulates information historically, like from the time you were a baby until what you are now, you have been accumulating information in your biology, right? And it also accumulates it from an evolutionary standpoint. So that's another axis of accumulation of information. Your DNA has accumulated over this 4.5 billion years.
Maybe I could find some disagreement here.
Practically speaking.
Any order, could DNA be arranged in any order and convey the information we're speaking of?
What do you mean any order? If it were in any order, just like random order, the organism would die.
Yes, there's no information there, right? There's nothing conveyed there, correct?
Right, there would be nothing. There wouldn't be any pragmatic information.
Yeah, so the point is, how does the pragmatic information originate? That's what I'm trying to get from you, because in our paradigm, we have an intelligence. Okay, it's coming from intelligence. That's it. Right. Now, from your paradigm, I want to know how is this happening?
Okay, in our paradigm, it comes from the history of the organism starting out very, very early, when the molecules and the information were much smaller and much simpler. And when they arranged themselves in a certain way, they either were more stable or less stable. If they were more stable, then they were selected for. Okay. Then basically that's stability. Now if they were in a 50-degree environment or a 10-degree environment, their stability would change. So basically the world is the information that's being encoded in that particular mix of chemicals. Okay. And the problem for abiogenesis is that we don't know a hell of a lot about it. And the reason we don't know a lot about it is not because of its impossibility, but because it has too many possibilities. Okay?
So you're invoking some kind of selection.
Yes, yeah. Selection happened at a very, very early stage. Chemicals will be selected for.
So you're saying like what chemicals that tend to last kind of thing? They stick around?
Yeah, they would stick around longer. They would be more stable.
Now what to me, okay, the more complex a molecule becomes, the less kind of likely it's going to stick around, as opposed to like something like take water. If we're just going to name a molecule, water will just be water. But if I take a protein and just put it into the environment, it's going to break down.
It will break down, but not. It does. But at the same time, it's breaking down. There is a building up because energy is going into that information system, and it's creating new chemicals. Okay.
So wait. Now you're invoking a system. So what's the system you're invoking?
Okay, the system. Well, there's a lot of systems. One of them is your cell. Okay, any particular cell.
We didn't get to cell.
That's what we're trying to get to. Is a cell.
I'm trying to get.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, I agree with you when you jump to cells, life. We have.
Excuse me a second. Okay, what the hell do I call you? Isbitsky?
Dan, fine.
Dan. Okay, Dan. Okay, Dan. Jungle Jargon said he's trying to get to the cell. Did you say we're not trying to get to the cell?
I'm trying to. Yeah, I'm saying I'm talking about before the cell, because once you jump up to cells, we have life then. So I'm talking about before that. How do you get from no information to this information system processing and life and all this? I can't understand from your worldview. I could understand it from coming from intelligence. It's totally implausible not coming from intelligence.
Before the cell, okay, for the first 100 billion years, there was an accumulation of more and more complex molecules, okay? And they didn't all break down. They were being created and breaking down at the same time because of a tremendous amount of heat, UV radiation, bombardment. They're just
complexity doesn't equate information.
let's be fair. So wait, so you're evoking
Complexity. He's invoking complexity.
to create molecules? Is that it?
Yeah, heat and complexity.
Complexity. It doesn't equate to information. Complexity. Information is a very, very small amount of what naturally forms.
I guess.
Complexity doesn't form by natural chemistry. It doesn't.
Well, if you want to call it complexity,
Chemical compound doesn't equal complexity.
Okay, those are assertions.
We're talking about it.
Fine. Those are assertions, and those are some of the fundamental problems we have between our worldviews.
Well, of course, you think that
Definition,
a couple
define
of
the
different
term.
molecules being able to bond to a bigger molecule equals complexity, and
Yes.
it really doesn't.
But
Yeah, if I have-
complexity is not information.
It's not comparable to biological complexity, and here's why. Biological complexity is purposeful, meaningful, and functional. Getting a polymer, like a chain of a particular atoms to stick together into a chain, or getting one atom to stick to another to form a molecule, doesn't do anything. It has no function. There has to be corresponding molecules that, when they interact with them, provide a function of some kind that does something else that's useful to yet something else. That's what complexity is when related to biology. Natural chemistry doesn't produce any of that.
Well, combine some sulfur and some oxygen and some hydrogen, and throw it on your rusty car. And
It doesn't provide a function.
You'll see a function.
No, that's not a
information.
It's a reaction, not a function.
ASFB mod. We're gonna have to talk at some point. Anyway, now you guys are too many. You are too many, and I'm about to bail here.
Yeah, let's just like maybe we could just like one.
You know, Daniel, I would love to have an individual conversation with you. We can do that. And SFB mod, we all really want to talk to you on my channel.
Speed, you know, there's something you really need to think about, and is that, you tell us all these stories about how this must have happened and that happened and that happened and led to this and led to that, and we understand you believe that. The problem is you don't have any scientific reason to believe it. This is the things that had to have happened if abiogenesis were true, and therefore you believe it because you believe abiogenesis.
Well, what would a scientific
But there's no scientific evidence for any of this, and scientists are completely at a loss to explain any developmental path toward any biological system. Nothing.
Yes, Speed, I agree with Neff. I just want to say, is this more of like a philosophical position, like a presupposition?
It's a presupposition, exactly, Daniel.
I mean, I just, and that's fair. I mean, because we all have presupposition. I just want to know if it's really more of a like, kind of like Neff said, like, this had to have happened. So, you have to invoke some kind of process here. You know what I mean?
I think we're bumping into philosophy all of the time, left and right, and we almost can't help it. But scientists try to stick with methodological naturalism, and that means we're going to do our.
That's the problem.
But if they use methodological naturalism, they're not able to do.
Nephilim, I'm glad you're here because Nephilim, I have
the problem is that if you stick to methodological naturalism, you don't find anything in chemistry that produces a chemical pathway towards anything biological. That's the problem. So even if you stick to methodological, scientists have been experimenting for a very long time, and some really big minds doing it, not just guys who go the bachelor's degree. I mean, some of the best minds in biology, chemistry have been tinkering around trying to solve the issue of origin of life for several decades now. And they haven't come across anything, nada, zilch. And so they're employing the scientific method, methodological naturalism, as you call it, and they come up empty. So you're telling us methodological naturalism provides a solution, but methodological naturalism has led the scientists involved in origin of life studies to absolutely nothing.
It's a dead end.
That's right. Total dead end.
See if anybody gets this joke. Nephilim, I have a whole jar full of periods that I could sell you for cheap.
That was cute.
Okay.
I like your humor, Speed. That's
yeah,
funny,
like when you know. Immanuel Kant, he's a German philosopher. He wrote these. He had sentences that went for like 3 paragraphs, or 3 ordinary paragraphs. And my joke is that they ran out of periods in Germany in the 18th century, and that's why he had to put commas everywhere, and he never finished a sentence. So it was horrible.
You have to listen to the very end to understand what they're saying.
Oh my God, it's impossible to understand Kant.
Pete, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Sure.
As long as you know, you're just interested in just being, you know, honest about it. That's it.
Yeah, I would like. I want to dig into the philosophy, because now today, John, I heard you say on Otangelo's channel, you said something about like how I denied the evidence and I didn't listen, and there was no hope, and you were kind of done talking to us. I had said the same thing about you guys 4 hours early, using exactly the same language. So if you guys are using exactly the same language I am, and I'm using the same as you, that should give us both pause, right?
I'm saying we all invoke presuppositions, a philosophical. That's undeniable. Okay, and we could go into whose whose presuppositions are more justified. You know what I mean? Like who. Yeah, we could go into it, and I'm happy to do that with you, so we can set it up, Steve.
Well, reach out to me, and we'll set it up, and just you and I will have a conversation. And it's a little difficult for me to converse with 5 of you at the same time.
Yeah, I understand that.
So, and I'm, and I just woke up, and I got to have some more coffee. Hi, John. He's not saying hi to me.
Hi, John.
He's muted.
I'm sure his spirit is saying hi, speed, love you.
Well, you know, and I have seen a lot of trash talking, you know, so you know, I get it, but that doesn't, like Untangelo said, it doesn't really get us anywhere. So
yeah, but what I would like to dig into with you, Daniel, if you would, is basically beliefs, philosophy, methodological naturalism.
Yeah,
what we think at the core, because I am always reviewing that in myself, right?
I'm fascinated by your strict materialism. That blows my mind away.
What? Oh, my strict material. Yeah, it's
that fascinates me because I find it to be bizarre, quite frankly.
I can just elaborate on that forever. I've been working on that shit for since I sobered up this.
I would say stick to the science. Forget the beliefs, the presuppositions.
Yeah, beliefs are problematic, I guess, in my religion, which is secular Buddhism, which asks you not to believe in anything. Zen Buddhism asks you to have an empty mind. Basically, you don't bring a belief into it. You bring the spirituality, but you don't bring the belief.
Is spirituality material?
Ultimately, you could hash it out as material, yeah.
Yeah,
you could explain it with neuroscience if you wanted, but then you would lose, of course, you would lose the flavor of it, right?
I think we have different ideas of what science is, Speed. I really do.
Yeah, well, it's good. Different ideas are always good to hash out.
Because I think when science studies, how things operate, and I think like you're pushing science to a realm of philosophy.
I do, and that I would like to dig into, and that I always like to analyze it myself.
You're trying to invoke science to answer questions that science isn't really equipped to answer, in my opinion.
Well, no, okay, I'll push back on you on that. I think like when people say, "Can science tell you what love is?" Well, yeah, it can.
It can.
Science can tell you a lot, but I don't think it will tell you how love is the way you're saying.
But, have you ever heard of Mary's Room?
You're saying love has ontology, right? So,
yes. Have you ever heard of Mary's Room? It's a philosophical experiment by these guys that are into philosophy of the mind. They talk about consciousness. Okay. And Mary's Room is the idea that Mary was a brilliant neuroscientist who was raised in a room where there was only black and white, where she could never see color. And she knew everything there was about how the mind processes color and what sees red and all of that stuff. So she knew of color. She knew there was a color called red, but she had never seen it. So then when Mary leaves Mary's room and for the first time she encounters red, basically what is added to her knowledge. And anyway, there's actually a book called Mary's Room, and I can't remember, is it Block or one of the big philosophers created this, but there are interesting things like that we could get into. But let's have a conversation on another day when I'm more prepared. I got Saturday Night at the Atheist tonight. We're going to be talking about you, Otangelo. I want to talk about you a little bit, John.
And talk about the science.
Yeah, I would love if you guys actually dug into what Otangelo offered to join you in your evolutionary, become an evolutionist with you. If you could explain, okay.
Well, we are in the process of converting Otangelo to our side of the fence. So.
That's the best joke of the night, Speed.
And then,
I love that.
I think when we're actually going to get the Nobel, if we convert John, we're going to get the Nobel Peace Prize.
You have a very high.
You have to present evidence. You have to give us evidence, though. We're not seeing any evidence.
I wish you guys would dig into what Otangelo's actually asking you to dig into. I see a lot of hand waving and ignoring it, invoking time, but time doesn't explain anything. You know what I mean? So,
oh my God, we are trying so hard with Demeter to explain things, and we're going to be working on that all month.
You know what I mean? If you said if I showed you a car, right? We pointed to the car, and you said, "Hey, Dan, how did that car get here?" And I said 1,000 years. Like, what would that mean?
Yeah.
Well, hey,
you have to have a mechanism, and how do you get the mechanism?
Yeah,
I was wanting to join earlier tonight, guys. I was wanting to ask more about what you were trying to talk about earlier about DNA information accumulating. I've got some information I've been studying the past few years, and some research projects I've worked on that question that. Okay. I was curious if you guys have time tonight to go back into that.
Do you have any papers or anything I can review?
I probably do. It's stuff that I started on when I was working on a project. I was reverse engineering some DNA work, probably good 10, 15 years ago. On Tangelo, he's got a ton of stuff that he's shown me recently that I am very willing to believe this. He's got something in there on that. There's so much information on his blog, but there's information out there on it. It mainly covers a lot of the some of the findings from about 20 years ago or so now. How DNA really it's preloaded with information. It's not that it's accumulating. It's basically it's not. I don't know. I don't want to try to get too much into it, but if you'd prefer, I guess for me to find some documentation on it first, I guess I could try to dig some.
Yeah, I'm going to send you an email, and we're going to hook up on a show. And maybe just you and I could talk, or you and I and Immutable. He's the guy you talked to yesterday.
Well, yeah, we could try, but yeah. The catch is, I'm afraid that if you want to defer to just documentation, that's going to be my weak point. Because again, this is stuff that I've done in a whole lifetime or two ago. This is stuff from decades ago. I've since changed careers, so I don't.
If you can just bring ideas, and we.
Oh yeah, sure. That I can do. My memory's still good.
SFT, come on. Well,
so you're to reverse. Oh, I'm sorry, Jungle.
What we need to reverse engineer is the splitting of the water molecule. That's what we need to reverse engineer, because then we can make a lot of money.
Well, Jungle, I was hearing you talk about that too, and I was thinking to myself, I mean, that's not just basic fuel cell technology.
Yeah, but it takes a lot of energy to do that.
Not necessarily. Not if using it as a battery. So we've been using that since the 1940s. That's basically what powered the Apollo missions to the moon was hydrogen fuel cell technology. We still use it today. The space shuttle used it.
But it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of electricity, comparatively speaking, to split the water molecule, and then it doesn't become efficient. That's why we're not using hydrogen fuel cell cars right now, because it's not efficient.
Well, again, you're right. It's not efficient, but you can still. It's called fracking the water. You can still do it and get a positive energy output.
Electrolysis, basically. That's all it is.
The battery.
I'm breaking up.
Yeah, you just put a charge in the water, basically, and it's called electrolysis.
Well, exactly. And it frees the hydrogen ions and it releases a little bit of energy. And yeah, the idea is to make, I think you were saying 100% efficiency. That would be the holy grail of technology.
Yeah, it works, but it takes so much energy to make it work, though.
Well, and
Well,
the reality is that we do know how to, or we don't know how to, we know what can do it at 100% efficiency, and that is quantum control enzymes in biological systems. We already know that it's possible to
that's what I'm
execute
talking about.
that. We're just trying to figure out how to actually apply that in a controlled setting for our own ends. I mean, that's the holy grail.
If you
I
could
think
figure
it's
that
double check,
out,
but
you'd have it made.
my
Yeah, there's a
understanding was the
new.
main limitation was
That
on
requires a lot of
detecting the free
enzymes and
hydrogen
proteins
ions.
and everything, right?
Yep, there's a new RNA world every 10 years because it fails.
Who is the Godfather?
What's up, Tony?
Yeah, I
Tony.
figured if Tony sneaking in here under an alien.
Tony, I don't like
Sorry,
that.
Tony,
You came in with another name. I muted you yesterday because you were a name calling. I adverted you several times that I would not admit that at my channel, and it is just dishonest to come in with another name, and I will remove you from the.
Well, how else can I talk to you?
Well, he's just got to learn to be just a little nicer.
Civilized.
Anyway, let's see what else. We have a project on my channel to reverse engineer young Earth creationists. Anybody sign up?
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, how do you reverse engineer
to us?
Because you want to become us? Is that what you're saying, Steve?
No, I want to figure out how you work.
Of course you do.
Yeah. Okay. So then you'll figure out why.
Well, we can figure out how you work. We can find a remedy.
Are you an astro? Are you been into any kind of astrophysics?
Not so much. We do have a guy on our channel, Leophilius, that is very much into quantum mechanics and astrophysics.
Yeah, that's one of my primary fields as well. Yeah, no, young Earth creationism. It's not so much a matter of if it's young or old anymore. Ever since we combine relativity with other things with quantum mechanics, man, time is irrelevant.
Time is relevant.
Where are you at on the edge of the Earth?
Basically, it could be anywhere. It could be with
time is a fabrication.
Well, it's also relative, as Einstein would put it. It's not. Yeah. It can be almost anything. And there's all kinds of other possible variables to make it so that the entire universe could be recreating itself every 6 seconds, as far as science is concerned.
Yeah.
So what I would challenge though is things such as the uranium to lead decay rates they try to assume things like the age of the Earth being 4.8 billion or whatever. Some of those are flawed. I mean, there's all things I can talk about that as far as how the fact that there's other sources of uranium that haven't decayed, that would invalidate some of those assumptions. But other than that, the as far as the science of it goes, you can go either direction, young or old.
What does a million-year-old dirt look like?
Yeah, several
6,000-year-old dirt.
Say again?
I said
no. I was watching Andrew Snelling, and he said they're using asteroids. They're using asteroids to determine the age of the Earth was by asteroids.
Right. That's what I was talking about. They make the assumption, and it's a pure assumption. Since there's 4 main ones, but there's several other minor ones. But where basically they find these mixed asteroid meteorites, actually what they are, because they've landed on the planet, where they're mixed with a specific type of uranium that decayed into a lead isotope. And since this uranium has a whatever it is, 8 billion whatever half-life, then they just assume that parts of that uranium has decayed into that lead, and so that must have been the half-life. So it was 4.8 billion. But again, there's other sources of those types of isotopes elsewhere outside of meteoroids that invalidate that whole theory.
Yeah, doesn't that assume like that's the only way the ice that's like
right?
It assumes the original ratio, number one.
Well, and again, the ratio itself is actually irrelevant. The assumption is based on the idea that the Earth is cooled, and you have all these other presuppositions of what should have happened first, and then after the Earth became solid, then these asteroids collided, meteorites, whatever, and so these meteorites created that timestamp. And it's like, no, there's all kinds of other possibilities.
No, what I'm saying is like, how do you know you started out like with the X amount of, I don't know what you're invoking, like
uranium
or something? Yeah. How do you know it wasn't just lead? You know what I mean?
See, that's part of the question mark. Yeah. And so it's not about amount. The radioactive isotope, the decay rate is static no matter what the element is. Well, generally, okay, that's another assumption that the radioactive decay rates are static. But yeah, it's just the fact that there is X amount, or there is some of this type of uranium isotope, and there's some of this lead isotope it creates the assumption. It's a logical assumption that because the uranium does decay into lead, but it's not a scientific, solidifiable whatever. It's not repeatable that it had to have been only that way. There's all kinds of other possibilities.
I agree. I also agree that in the lab under this condition, it would decay at this rate. You know what I mean? I agree with that, but that doesn't tell you what you started with. Is my problem with the whole.
Well, and the irony too is that in the lab they have figured out different ways to accelerate decay rates. So
and they do. You guys familiar with what's called NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology?
Name sounds familiar. They're the ones that did a bunch of those crazy experiments and were like doing some crazy stuff with decay rates and
they do everything as far as North America is concerned. Yeah, they're in the news kind of big for a while after 9/11. They had a bunch of NIST experiment stuff. But
there's actually a whole lot of scientific evidence that the Earth is only thousands of years old. A lot of people haven't looked into it to find it, but the truth is there's actually a mountain of it.
I agree, and that's what I'm saying. As far as answering your question, Speed, I go either way. I mean, to me, time it's not irrelevant, but it's not. There's no guarantee.
It's a big shocker to a lot of people to actually people who are willing to go with what the evidence is, and they're not so married to a paradigm that the Earth has got to be this age because I believe this, then therefore that must be true. If you're not deeply married to the paradigm that the Earth, for some reason or another, because of some other belief that the Earth has to be mega millions of years old, those people who are honest enough with the evidence to say they're going to go with the evidence and will do so are actually shocked to find out the Earth is actually not millions of years old. Because we're brought up to believe that the Earth is of this incredible age from the time we're tiny kids. It's pumped into our heads over and over in various ways, and so we naturally come to believe it, and people swallow that idea without ever considering is it true or not.
You know what that's called?
It's called indoctrination.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
But the thing that I like to kind of highlight, that might be an also maybe an equal shocker, is that both directions, old in the young Earth age theories, it's all creationists. They're all of that, both of those ideas, the 13.8, whatever, 14 billion year old, whatever, it changes every once in a while, of the whole universe, that came from Arno Panzea. He's a Jew. And when he's the one that discovered the cosmic background radiation effect. But when he he got his Nobel Prize for it, he basically told them that all it did was confirm the Bible to him.
Yeah, but he was wrong. It contradicts the scriptures.
I don't know. See, that's the thing. It does it? That's the question mark.
Yes, it does.
And here's something I've always put forth
profoundly.
Well, here's what I've always put forth is that, and you're alluding to this. SFB. What do you want to go by the way?
What am I? What? I'm sorry.
What should I call you? Mod, SFB. What's your?
SFB. I guess Joel.
Okay. Joel. Okay.
Real guy.
One of the things that I find very interesting is, and I'm sure you're aware of this, last year there was a formal theory put forth that time is not figuratively, but literally an illusion. So that's one aspect of it.
Well, Einstein said that back in the 20s.
Well, absolutely. I'm not saying that now there's formal theories of this being put forth, published. But beyond that, I think it's, when you're talking about relativity, why, if, the more we're learning about quantum and, things not existing actually until they collapse, wave collapse and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, why would we not assume that time doesn't actually apply until the collapse? So we
talking about wave function collapse or what?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the perception of light, for example, traveling from a star, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is not collapsed into a photon, right? Until we're getting into the observation aspects and such, but the point I'm making is, one of the problems of if the constants have to be constant, or we have all sorts of other problems, right? Well, my point is that if the constants don't apply until it becomes matter, if you will, quote unquote,
We'll see.
Then the time factor doesn't actually apply in reality. So like from our perception, yes, it would take if a matter-based object, i.e. us, was trying to travel to a star, it would take X time. However, light does not have matter, and light is not subject to time, only from our relative perspective. So
well, it's matter, it just doesn't have mass, to be clear. But go ahead, yes.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't have matter until the collapse, though. When it's a wave, it doesn't have matter.
Well, that's everything.
Well, okay. There's arguments about that in quantum at this point, but it's not actually there until
well, yeah, and that's the cool thing about quantum physics is that it basically ruined almost everything, all the paradigms that
right.
was talking about.
But the point I'm making
destroyed all of that. So
absolutely.
you're absolutely right. So
that's the point I'm making is from our perspective, time applies. The point I'm making is that only from our perspective.
Well, yeah, I was gonna highlight that whether or not we're looking at a photon that was released from a spinning electron that was created from another piece of matter from a star, whatever, something from some other wave function collapse billions of light years away, or if it came from somewhere in between, or if it came like within inches from our eye, all of these possibilities exist. That's why it's almost stupid. I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's ridiculous to assume anything is time-based these days. It literally is all an illusion. There's so many other possibilities right now.
Hey guys, could I just interrupt for a second? I've got to get out of here, but Daniel, email me at speedofsound@gravity@gmail and SFB model. Send something to you. And
Okay.
Otango, this is really cool. I don't know if you've ever introduced cats to each other, but what happens is you put the cats in a room and you let them kind of peek at each other, and that's kind of what's happening with me and John right now. We're not going to talk to each other, but it's good to put the cats together once in a while. So thank you. Anyway, I'm gonna bail, guys. Good chat. Okay.
Speed, take care of yourself.
I do want to talk to you about that information loading thing someday, Speed. Thanks.
Yes, we'll talk about that. And Leo would love to talk to you about quantum physics and radioactive decay, I think. So okay, good talk, guys. Yeah, let's go to our corners. I mean, we are generating, content and interesting information. So let's just keep at each other.
Yeah, you have a good night.
Okay, later.
Take care.
What's so entertaining about those kinds of closing statements is that we are creating all this interesting information. And what is the key variable that's required for the creation of all this interesting information? Oh, wait, it's intelligent agency. It's intelligent agency. And we take for granted the fact that information can be created without with intelligent agency. And yet the atheists seem 100%. Well, actually, their entire worldview is 100% dependent on the premise that prescriptive functional information can come into existence without the requirement of an intelligent agent.
Well, it goes worse than that, John. What they do, they talk about it in the curriculum at school, and they write about it in their science papers about genetic information, this, that, and the other. But then, when actually discussing it and trying to, give an account for how it came about without agency, they just come right out and say it's not actually information. That's how they dismiss it. So that's the game that they play in a way, as a way of trying to defend their views of naturalism, is to declare that the genome isn't actually information. It's not real information.
Well, and it's more dishonest than that as well, Nathaniel, because they'll say natural selection is their agency.
Yeah, which of course is completely ridiculous. Bogus. Yeah.
Well, the other day, Joel, you were making an interesting point. I make similar arguments on a regular basis about the archive data and function in the genome, and I'm like, when you really start to get into the things like the epitranscriptome and like these different additional variable layers that are on top of it, I'm like, okay, so you have
it's not random. Yeah.
Well, not only is it not random, you have things, and you were making the point about AI. I make that argument all the time. I'm like, we have a dynamic system.
Yes.
That is doing crazy stuff.
Exactly.
We are just now barely being able to even recognize what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we're trying to recreate things with even a modicum of the same functionality.
That's exactly my project was. You're exactly right.
And I'm like, we can't even come close. Like, our systems are failing left. I mean, we're getting better, obviously, but they're failing left and right. Like, not even close to what we're observing happening in biological systems. And I'm like, you're so okay. So what it boils down to is, could one of our artificial intelligence AI, one of our AI systems with machine learning and everything else, could one of those come into existence without an intelligent agent? If the answer is no, then get out of town with the argument that but life can exist without an intelligent agent. I mean,
I am an AI coder. I guarantee you, an AI cannot code itself. We try.
One of the greatest failures of the godless camp when it comes to genetic information is that, as John mentioned, it's prescriptive, and prescriptive information requires forward thinking. Someone in intelligence has to think about a goal to achieve, something that needs to be accomplished to prescribe. To have information that prescribes either something to be manufactured or a process that needs to be fulfilled in order to achieve something. So it requires thinking, mental processes, not chemical ones, thinking about the future. And of course, it's irrational to believe that chemistry can think about the future. Molecules only interact with each other when they're in immediate proximity to each other and in the present. Chemistry has no access to the future. A chemical reaction has nothing to do whatsoever with what's going to happen or could happen a second or a year from now. And to combat this fact, this is when the evolutionist goes back into their denialism and say, well, it's not prescriptive because it's not even information. I mean, they just have to try to pull the wool out from under the science in order to hold to their evolutionism.
Hey, Joel, when you were doing your research, did you ever come across like the dual syntax stuff?
Yes.
Okay. When I came across a couple papers on that stuff, I was like, okay,
that blew my mind, dude.
Freaking dope. And when have you ever done like 3D printing stuff?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's
my second degree is in 3D programming. Sorry,
okay. So I was you mess around with like G code and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, the translational pausing logic and that dual syntax, like that is literally like 3D printing controls. Like you have element, timing, physical locate. I'm like, what the heck is this other than 3D printing logic? And
no, you're exactly right. I described it as scaffolding now. Used to assume that there's just a lot of this junk DNA left over from millions and billions of years of just DNA that's no longer used, like what the other gentleman was saying, this accumulation of data. It's not an accumulation. It's all 100% necessary. And like Logic was just talking about, some of that, even though it's not quote unquote, a functional process to create a protein chain, it's still absolutely necessary because there's certain genes that require to be side by side. They have to be in a certain physical, specific space, three-dimensional, a matrix essentially. And so there's other parts of code that puts those genes next to each other, across different chromosomes, even just perfectly to be able to do the translocations they need to build. That's not random.
When I started
information system.
Yeah, when I started learning about the inter and intra chromosomal gene regulation, I was like, okay, yeah, this is over. If you're going to argue that is not
that's random.
Well, if you're going to argue that's random, you're a nut. But if you're not going to argue that is a literal if-then, I don't know what is. Like, what else constitutes this? You have to have a specific geographic location with a specific data set that has to be implemented at a specific moment in a process in order for the outcome to occur.
Pre-planned. Yes.
Like, what is that other than a literal pre-programming? And then it's astonishing. Like,
for a purpose.
There's electrical signals in the computer too. Are you saying that the electrical signals being sent through circuits isn't pre-programmed? I mean, like, what's your point?
One of the most astonishing discoveries in genetics is that there's information available to the cell in the DNA molecule when it's uncoiled that's not available to the cell when it's supercoiled. And the converse is true. There's certain genetic information that's available for the cell to use when the genome is supercoiled into chromatin that is not available when it's not. So to illustrate this, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a really long rope. Let's say the rope is, I don't know, 50 yards long. And you have a loop in the end, and you stick a metal pipe in there, and you spin the pipe so that as the rope gets, this is not exactly how DNA is super coiled, but it'll give you an understanding of what I mean. So you keep spinning the rope and twisting it, and you know what happens is the rope begins to knot, and it gets shorter and shorter and shorter as it gets coiled up, right? So you do this until the rope is nothing but one long chain of knots now, because it's been all twisted up, right? What this does is it puts pieces of rope right next to each other that were not next to each other when the rope was not twisted up. See what I mean? Now you've got information next to information that's usable to the cell that's not usable when it's uncoiled. This is an astonishing discovery in genetics. It means that the entire genome was designed in such an incredibly ingenious way that information that codes for does one thing when it's supercoiled, when it's uncoiled, now becomes a new package of information when it's supercoiled. So the entire genome from bit A to the last bit of data in it had to have been written in such a way that it could be this overlapping and nested information package that amazing as it is when it's uncoiled, but then also so when it's completely coiled up into chromosomes, it becomes a different novel set of information by employing the same sequences of information that you already wrote into it.
Exactly.
It is unbelievable technology, guys. It is mind-bending technology.
Yeah, it's impossible. It's not something that just came together by random chance.
No, man can't even make
it.
And
this is where it gets very,
what happens when it gets tangled up?
And Joel, you alluded to this the other day too, in terms of like the archive data that's relevant to specific cell types.
Right.
I mean, what they've been discovering just in the last like 3 or 4 years on this, like, oh, holy crap! It turns out this entire portion of the genome is actually active, but only in vivo and only in this cell type.
Correct.
And, we didn't have the imaging data technology to observe it in vivo. So we've been thinking it has no purpose. Wait, now we are. But I tell you, one of the things that I recently just came across that I thought was very fascinating is, they're starting to find function for pseudogenes and such, right? One of the things that they've been coming across relatively recently is pseudo, well, I call them like pseudo enzymes. And in this context, they thought it was a broken version, right, of a functional enzyme. Turns out what they actually are, because they're transcribed, but they don't appear to have function. What they've now discovered in vivo is that some of these pseudo, quote unquote, pseudo enzymes actually bind with the active enzyme and basically prevent a chemical reaction until it reaches the appropriate geographic location in the cell. Then it unbinds, and then the requisite reaction actually occurs. And I'm like, wait a minute. So you're going to argue that this supposedly functionalist deal is required? Otherwise, this chemical reaction would happen in the incorrect location, and therefore the end function would not be executed.
Exactly.
And you're going to claim that this is an example of junk DNA. How? Like, how does that make any sense? Like, this is literally required for the for the function. Like, it's a component of the function. You just didn't realize this function was required.
There's another illustration I read about that logical that was really fascinating to me. How they described it as literal secret agents, like spies within the genome code itself, where they were basically creating secret messages. It's like you were saying, it's a different type of enzyme. It's nothing related. Oh, hold on. My wife's getting ice. I don't know if you can hear in the background.
Hey, guys, I'm going to kick out of here because there's a debate starting on Standing for Truth's channel real soon. Dr. Ron Garrett and Bill Morgan. I think it's going to be a very interesting debate, so I'm going to hop over there. Thanks for having me, Tangelo, and you guys. It's good to see you. Catch you after a while.
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce over there too. Hey, by the way, Joel, you might want to. You'd have a very entertaining debate with Ron. So his background, he has a PhD in computer science. He worked for NASA on robotics and AI, and then
I am thinking about joining NASA today. By the way, go ahead.
then he was the lead architect for the original version of AdWords for Google.
Okay.
In my debate with him, he actually argued that AI could create itself. And
I wish.
Yep. He argued that a dual syntax programming language could also create itself.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
And he also argued that it was reasonable that he could come up with a model for how, from an information theory perspective, a bar of iron could somehow turn itself into a sword without an intelligent agent.
Wow.
And this guy is a PhD in computer science, worked for NASA, worked for Google, and he claimed that, my knowledge I just didn't have enough knowledge of information theory, which I have my background in tech too. And I'm like, yeah. So anyway, long story short, I did a little diatribe afterwards of like, I literally dare you to go ask any one of your peers and like make this claim. So it might be entertaining. You might have some fun have a debate with this guy, because
the wrong word, fun, but okay.
Since you're, I'm obviously being facetious, but the hey, so I'm writing AI too. Like, what's up? When he actually argued that yes, it was plausible this could happen, I honestly for a minute, for about 5 seconds, I didn't know how to respond. I'm like, I did not remotely anticipate a computer scientist PhD who was a software architect for Google and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's no way he would actually argue that that could create itself. Like, nobody who writes code would ever make that argument. Oh wait, he just did.
Yeah, I write AI code. My last job was doing stuff for financial stuff. That if you wanted to assume something could happen in one and whatever impossible figure chance in hell, then you could assume anything. But no.
Yeah, but see, here I find interesting, like was it Facebook or Google's quantum computer that like started writing its own language and they like freaked out and shut it down? I forget which project that was, but it was last year sometime. But the point I was making in that whole where I'm going with that whole context is, okay, cool. So this AI was being able to write its own language. I know
what you're talking about now. Okay,
but
it wasn't actually a language, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's the way it was framed in the article I read about it. But the whatever it was doing, I'm like, well, are you actually arguing that would ever occur if scientists of a variety of disciplines hadn't created the quantum computer in the first place? Like it's fascinating to me how I'm using that as an example, like how those in favor of abiogenesis and just random chance in general, I'm like, you're skipping over the entire point that you would have to have the AI in the first place in order for the rest of this stuff to occur.
Much less the quantum computer, right?
Right. Or yeah, that's why I said multiple disciplines. Like, you have to have the logic and the programming and the computer, and you have to understand the physics. And it's got to be at almost absolute zero. I mean, you think about all of the different variable components that there's no. Like, yes, are they all the end result of control of physical laws? Yeah. Are you ever going to claim that they could happen? Who cares how many, you could have infinite time and an infinite number of universes. Are you actually arguing that this could occur by chance? I mean,
of course it can. Come on.
Yeah, what I would argue is that what they're describing as far as like artificial languages and stuff like that actually we already do that. We've been doing that for a long time, and it's not fancy. It's not an actual language. So in information science, for example, basically the whole effort of the industry is to try to take what's called disparate information. We take all of these just massive databases full of junk, full of how many shoes X and YZ stores sold over X amount of years, how many
analysis.
Basically, yeah. But it's all disparate. It's all this different types of information, different formats, different things. And a lot of the purpose is lost. Whoever submitted whatever spreadsheet, 15 years ago may have knew what it was, but today we have no idea. But we still have to figure out what it is, where to put it, how to combine it, how to analyze it. And so what we use AI for is to try to, it basically is fancy filters. Look at all this just petabytes worth of just seemingly useless random information, try to make sense of it, filter it out. And so the AI will try to make some sort of sense out of some of the grouping and create a protocol and say, okay, I'm going to call this group this, and the AI will be smart enough to be able to designate its own little, nomenclatures, whatever. And then it'll share that stream, that data stream of, okay, this group of this material we think is this, and then it'll combine that with other things. And so it'll create these streams, these data streams, basically, of what seems to be non-disparate data. But it's basically math, and it's not a true language, and it changes within seconds. As soon as another piece of information, or if there's a certain other group that makes more sense to the pre-programmed, pre-engineered AI in the machine language algorithms, it'll change that language, or whatever you want to call it, that script. So it's nothing like human language. It's nothing comparable at all.
Well, in one of the key components of all that you mentioned there, and I know it's in a lot of AI, we're trying to somehow circumvent this in some aspects, but a significant portion of what we're doing is trying to account for as many possible if-thens, and with like loose parameters to be able to account for new variables, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. So what do we see in the adaptation in biological systems? Well, we've got crap loads of pre-existing functions, some of which are active, some of which are not. They have wide parameters of potential variability that are regulated in a controlled fashion, but it requires the accounting for the foreknowledge to even account for the if-then, like variation of that capacity, or like, hey, data in this context of this similarity, then do this sort of variation to it. And I'm like, what? Okay, so how does this not lend credence to the requirement of intelligent agent? I don't get it. Like, the more adaptation capacity, in my opinion, actually leads greater and greater credence to the designer versus the other way around.
Well, not only that, but the whole end goal, the whole purpose for even trying to simulate an intelligence or information processing like this with AI or even our own, it's to make it useful. You have to have useful information. Information, it's not information unless it is useful, unless it has a purpose. And if all of your data streams, if it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't help generate or make the conclusion that you need to actually do something with it, it's junk. It's worthless. You delete it, or you shelve it somewhere to analyze another day. And so even like this if-then comparison you're trying to talk about, the AI, I can kind of think of ways of helping it to create its own if statements, but it still has to do so to make it interpretable or make it useful for what we call the consumer, the end user, the human that's going to read this data. It has to make sense to that human. If it doesn't, it's useless.
Well, and I think another level beyond that too is you still have even when the data is mined, you still have to have the translation agent on the other end.
Exactly.
The interpreter in this context obviously is a human, right? Now there's obviously, as our AIs are improving, obviously there's more and more filters being able to be applied
right
on each level. But at the end of the day, it still requires ultimately a human at some point, right? And
the theory. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, anyway, the point I was making on that is in the context of biological systems, it's like there are so many different interpreter functions inside of our bodies, every form of life. It's like
not just interpreters, but regulators.
Well, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Regulators of the interpretation for sure, absolutely.
Yeah, there are processes within life that stop certain processes so they don't damage things. That's not random.
Well, something I thought was pretty cool was the just as an example, the ribosome will pause, like completely shut down the elongation if, as an example, things get overheated, and then if in a certain amount of time, if the heat drops, then it will re-engage with elongation. If the heat stays, then it terminates the entire process. I'm like, that's pretty freaking cool. Like, talk about a safety protocol. I mean, there's so many of them, obviously, in ribosomes, there's so many different protocols, but just as an example, I'm like, so you have a heat sensor and a time variable sensor. Oh, it's still going to be safe inside of this time window. If not, terminate and start again. Like, that's amazing to me.
And if it doesn't work, doesn't do its job on time, what breaks, right? Life is very delicate. I think I read something on Tangelo on some of your stuff about that, about the super complexity of ribosomes. It's like one of the, or if not the most complex chemical known to man right now.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the most complex, but I mean, what the paper that John made me aware of describes it like a nervous system which has internal signaling, distant signaling pathways, and control mechanisms, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I often, you know, I'm an engineer scientist kind of guy. I like to parallel a lot of these kind of conversations with stuff that we do, you know, in the human industry, you know, especially with rocket science. I'll tease people and say, okay, well, if evolution were true, then you know, how do we make like the Falcon Heavy rocket? You know, it didn't evolve from a Falcon 9 into a Falcon Heavy on its own.
Yeah,
It took
but
a lot of intelligence.
the rockets don't
That's
replicate
what they
themselves.
think.
Exactly.
They think-
If they replicated themselves, then it's reasonable that it formed by chance.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I'm just telling you what
John, when I bring up my factory argument, then a very common objection by atheists is, oh, but cells self-replicate, but man-made machines don't. And then I tell them, well, you don't know that self-replication is the epitome of advancement of complexity, and we are not even close to be able to do it. And then I demonstrate them that it requires at least 30 irreducible proteins to have self-replication, and you need it prior that life began. So how did that complexity come to be?
Exactly. Now, self-replication is a technology by itself.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, we're trying to do that right now.
I know. That's what always fascinates me when I listen to people like. Go ahead.
They were saying that nanotechnology is going to be making all kinds of things, and it never took off.
Well, I mean, that depends on what they're talking about. I was doing, that was my first civilian job, was nanotechnology. I was doing MEMS and microchip stuff about 1999 to about 2006.
But I was reading magazines where it would say, you know, it could make all kinds of things, useful things that we could use and everything. And
there is.
And it's what always gets me about on the nanotech side. Like, we are just now getting the level of imaging and scanning technology to be able to actually truly visualize the nanotech that's happening in biological systems. And like protein and stuff. Like, actually, I watched Oxford had done some imaging last year, and they actually finally had real-time video of motor proteins literally walking along
No way.
It wasn't animation; it was literal video of a motor protein walking along on a microtubule.
If you can link that to us, I would love to see. That's my wife and I's favorite. Nucleus, or not nucleus, whatever you call it, cell function is the motor protein.
I was like, I'll see if I can find it again. It was like 3 or 4 months ago. I was like randomly Googling stuff, and I came across it, and I was like, hang on, I gotta watch this. And I did, and I was like, holy crap, it looks just like the animation of a motor protein that I've seen. And then it cuts back to the professors being like, you know, we were just amazed that we actually got to visualize and see this in real time. Not, it was no longer just theoretical, you know. But
because I've done that kind of imaging again for MEMS and stuff like that. We I don't know if you've seen IBM's little, what do you call it, thing that's like a little skit of a boy playing the baseball. They're looking at the individual atoms, and they made a little animation out of it, so we could see very, very small. But say again.
I'm sorry, am I talking out loud? My bad.
Oh no, let's make sure we didn't interrupt. You know, especially you haven't talked a whole lot.
I didn't realize I wasn't muted. Sorry.
No, you're fine. What was I going to talk about? Oh, so yeah, no, we can image things pretty well. It's extremely difficult and expensive, of course, and you know we're down to 5 nanometers now in the microchip market. What was I going to? There's a point I was going to make about it. What was it?
We're talking about imaging motor protein.
Yeah, I've seen a computer simulation of the motor of the kinesis, whatever you call it, motor protein, where they showed it basically was just a pure raw computer simulation. It wasn't it wasn't like an artist's animation drawing, where they looked at the actual individual proteins for the way the little legs and they had all ATP things that you know, it would cause the little legs to move and connect and disconnect from the microtubule thing. And so without an artist rendition version of it, they literally just did the physics, the raw chemical physics of it to show what it was real jerky. It was like snap, 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 snap. And that's the best I've seen.
Let's see. This is, I don't think this isn't the one I'd seen, but this looks like a.
Because the animation looks really cool, you know. It's the actual little walking little stick, you know.
Yeah.
I remember when they videoed the spinning ATP synthase, and they stuck something on the end of it so they could see it spinning.
Hey, Tangela, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. This isn't the other one I found. This is one.
It was a while back.
Of a motor protein. Let's see.
What do you call it, Santa Claus, Kelly?
Big fuzzy boots and a big pack of presents on.
My wife's sitting next to me, guys. She says the motor proteins. She calls it Santa Claus because it's got big fancy boots, big fuzzy boots, and a big pack of presents on the back.
Okay,
yeah.
Right.
The bag of toys.
So there's
molecular track, the microtubule, which is shown at the top by a long, thin structure called the stalk. So dynein drives itself along its track by alternately grabbing hold of binding sites, executing a power stroke, and then letting go, very much like a person swinging on monkey bars. One key discovery in our study was the existence of a very substantial hinge between the long, thin stalk of the dynein molecule and the grappling hook, like the wrist between a human arm and hand. This allows variation in the angle of attachment of the motor to its track and produces a great diversity of shapes of the molecule bound to its track. Images like these have allowed us to build a new computer model of how the dynein motor interacts with its molecular track. This movie shows the molecular track at the top and the motor connected to the track by its two long, thin arms that connect to the ring-like engines, and the two ring-like engines are themselves connected to one another by a flexible linkage. Between the stalk and the microtubule is the grappling hook, and the grappling hook has a hinge shown by the red dot. An understanding of motor proteins is very important for medical research because, for example, many viruses hijack motor proteins to travel to the nucleus. But motor proteins are also involved in motor neuron disease and cancers of various sorts. And now that we have a better...
I mean, that's not as detailed as this other one that I'd seen, but you get the...
I appreciate it.
I thought that was kind of cool, just seeing that one portion of the function. But there's another one. There's another one out there. I'll have to find it again. That it showed it in much more details, a little bit longer, but of a similar function. But I thought that was, when I got to actually see that, it's like, wow, that's extraordinarily similar to the animations I've seen. You know.
Yeah. I'm going to share that on some other forums I'm in today.
So when does the DNA splice itself or cut itself and splice itself back together? It gets tangled up or something?
Mitosis?
Are you talking about for during gene expression when it untangles and it's got the is the topoisomerase proteins do that?
You're talking about cell division.
Well, no.
That's during cell division.
Are you talking about for mitosis, or are you talking about for untangling a portion of the genome?
Angela was showing a video how it cuts itself and splices itself back together.
Oh yeah,
with proteins, of course.
Guys, I just want to interrupt you. I've seen that Anthony, he posted a post at my Facebook timeline. He basically has spammed every of my posts, always the same thing. And now he wrote, I never insulted you or Speed. He was the one attacking me, and I'm on your side, and you block me from your show. I talk about the science, you're a loss. And I mean, hey, I really warned several times that I do not want name calling, and he simply didn't listen, and I blocked him at the chat. Today he tried to come in without my permission by changing the name, and now he goes to my Facebook timeline and calls me out, and I blocked him. I mean, hey, I have much patience, but everything has a limit, and his limit has come, and I blocked him on Facebook, and he's not welcome anymore at my channel either.
Yeah, that's the same Anthony that I've talked to for years now. I mean, I'm gonna go talk to him myself because that does not sound like the same guy.
Yeah,
He's
so
always been-
Tony gets worked up sometimes. Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a thing between being civil and trying to shame the person by, using language and calling them out, or what I mean, calling them names or whatever. But it's at this point, I think it needs to be civil and just talk about the facts, and we'll get to the facts, and then people can make their own decision that way.
No, my problem is as well that basically at each post of mine on Facebook, he posts always about the RNA, how it doesn't work, things that have nothing to do with what I post on Facebook, and that's tiresome.
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean, anyone that talks to him, John, I think you are closer to him. It's nothing personal, but I gave him a chance, but it doesn't sum up, and he excuses, and then he goes on simply with the same behavior. And I think there is a limit. The limit has come, and for me, it's a stop now. Finish.
Well, I'll let him know.
Okay.
I tell you something else that we were talking about the like the protein, the DNA splicing and cutting and reassembly. I'd say the more we're learning about microRNAs, miRNAs, and both their source as well as the modification to the pre-existing outcome, I find that mind-bending when you think about it from a programming perspective. It's like okay, we have an include here that's being called in, and but what I find very interesting is more and more we're discovering that the supposed junk introns are actually one of the primary sources of the microRNAs. And the splicing process, they used to say, oh, all the introns are just, junk and being, going off into the ether. And it's like, oh, wait, turns out they're actually being processed into a hairpin RNA, or sometimes multiple hairpin RNAs. And then part of the mRNA maturation process is the binding of these to modify the protein output of the original sequence. And I'm like, so, okay, cool. So if I silence these codons here, then the ribosome recognizes this as a completely different designated protein output. Like, what? I mean, to me, when you really think about it, like, how do you remotely, and from any level of plausibility, argue that can be implemented without the foreknowledge of the desired end outcome?
And it's not so much of that just miraculous complication. It's that it's universal. Yes. All DNA, all genomes, everything, all of life does it the same exact way.
Well, and the other day, who was it you were talking to the other day when you were on? There was is it Mutable trying to give you crap about like there's some slightly different genetic codes, and I'm like, yeah, cool. Some of them, this codon that usually equals start equals an amino acid. How do you account for that? And
that's the thing.
And then how do you account for that? I'm talking about without a intelligent agent allowing for the variation. And I'm like, and then how do you account for from an evolutionary perspective, both the sequence of the genome and the translation mechanism recognition in the ribosome, they must simultaneously modify. Otherwise, you have death. Like, there is no way around this.
Right. The whole thing breaks. Right.
Like, and it's not guaranteed death. No way around it.
What he's talking about, there is one extra codon in RNA that can sometimes be used as a start-stop codon, but not in DNA. DNA, all life, all genomes, all plant microbes and people all use the same exact 3 start-stop codons for every sequence. It is completely universal. DNA is. RNA's got some differences, but it's just a packetized copy of parts of DNA.
Right. Well, and something else, and since you have even greater knowledge of information theory and data than I do, the obsession with the wobble effect as somehow being evidence for evolution drives me up the wall. I'm like, okay, we're doing rapid data expression, and there's going to be, you're accounting for errors. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in pretty much every single data transmission protocol that's ever been devised in the modern era, you have, actually right from inception, you're accounting for errors and being able to account, read them, account for some minor variations. As long as you don't have greater than X data corruption, you're able to account for the potential transmission errors. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, there's different. Yeah, and there's different types. I've got what's called CRC error correction type stuff, and then you've got, for like the internet, for example, you've got UDP versus TCP protocols, where UDP will send it'll send a data stream, and it won't care if there's any errors or not.
Right.
So that's why sometimes you'll watch videos and it'll be kind of crappy, or it'll have error mistakes, whatever in it. Versus TCP protocols, it will actually have a back and forth, a bidirectional, where if it'll ask the recipient, "Hey, did you get XYZ packet?" And if not, resend.
Right.
And real quick, by the way, Jungle, was this the video you were talking about? You were asking about earlier that I got on my screen?
I'm not sure. It was a video that Otangelo showed us about the cutting and resplicing, or with
Yes,
back together with
this is DNA.
proteins and enzymes. I'm not sure which one that is.
Yeah, this is well, that's the other one, but this is a
that one's DNA replication.
Yeah. So yeah, see these little things, they just fly out of nowhere randomly, without anybody controlling them. They just know where to go, right? Yeah, okay.
recently I made a post on Facebook that in order for life to perpetuate, we need both. We need DNA replication and we need the machinery to express genes. Both had to emerge at the same time. If you don't have one or the other, then no deal.
Isn't the machinery the product of transcription, though? Isn't it? It's like a chicken and egg problem, you'd say.
Well, RNA is the transcription of DNA.
I'm saying, like, to get the enzymes and all these things, like, it all has to be there. Like, you can't get it one at a time, kind of. Yeah.
Exactly. Where I like to describe it, since RNA is here right there, it's right now showing a example of how RNA is transcribed off of DNA. Yeah. RNA is
my
exactly
my signal's bad here. I'm not picking up everybody. But
can you hear me? Test. Am I there?
Hear you.
Okay. My little bubble thing's spinning.
Yeah,
so RNA.
I can't hear everybody. That's what happens when the signal starts to go.
Sometimes if you
thinking protocol. Right? So here's an example.
Well, there is the other debate. Maybe I'll go watch the other debate. No, I don't know.
So the RNA is what actually activates. Or
maybe I'll watch it later. I don't know.
And so without the subcomponents,
I have to cool down my.
I'm sorry,
my phone or something.
Sorry, he can't hear you, so that's why he keeps talking over you.
Okay? How do we fix it?
Jungle has to just leave, or just stop talking.
Okay. All right.
Well, can you hear other people, or just not me?
He's not hearing some people, so that it happens where he muted, so you're good.
Well, I don't want to not exclude anybody.
No.
Jungle is he just got some land by the lake in Missouri. He just retired, and where he's at right now, he doesn't have good signal. So he was having that's what he was talking about. He was having signal issues. He's having a good time in at the lake at his new lakefront property in Missouri. It's he's having a good time.
Yeah, you should invite us then, right? Go hang out.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
On my phone, I'd only be able to hear like one person, and then I'd start talking over people. It's really annoying. So I understand.
Yeah, to try to answer your question though, so the RNA little splice, that little section there, that's what's used to create the amino acid and the protein chains outside of the nucleus. And so those production those factories, basically, the different ribosome, there's like I don't know how many dozens of different types, are required for the RNA to be able to do anything useful. And so those have to exist first. And so the RNA can't exist, or it can't do anything without those pieces. And those pieces can't create the new nucleic acid pieces to be able to see little floaty pieces in there. Those are the ATPs and the nucleotide chain pieces to create all of this information with the actual the actual code, the actual letters, so to say. And so all this has to exist somewhere first. And so in the cell can't, I mean, it can replicate, it can copy, but it can't start from nowhere.
My question was the pieces, quote unquote, floaty pieces, they're a product of DNA too.
Well, they're nucleic acid pieces that will combine back into the DNA RNA chains.
Okay.
If you're asking do we have proteins that are making the nucleic acids? Is that what you're asking?
Or is that's not what I'm asking, but it sounds like what.
Now, yeah, basically, yes.
And yes, we do. That's what was it called? The mitochondria, I think, is where most of that's manufactured. Which is a whole other separate DNA chain. The mDNA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, mitochondrial DNA is only about 16,500 base pairs. It's microscopic compared to the overall genome, but it's one of the single most. Well, in reality, we couldn't exist without it. I mean, that's just the blunt reality. I tell you what, the whole premise of ATP synthase occurring without, I mean, the level of complexity of ATP synthase is just freaking nuts.
It is.
I mean, the machinery component, and the irony is, we don't actually even know all of the different parts that are going on in ATP synthase. Like, we don't actually know. We know some of them, but there's a bunch of them.
We don't know the function. So yeah.
And that's what always cracks me up. Like, there's a very interesting animation of that. It was done by Harvard, I think. And in their whole, this is like from a couple years ago, in their whole like exposition about like breaking down the different functions and stuff, like they freely admitted multiple times that they didn't have a clue about like, well, we know that this is what the end outcome is. Like, how necessarily all this happens? Yeah, I kind of don't know.
That's the reverse engineering part, right?
And that's the irony for me of when you think about what we're told. And Speed was talking about this earlier, like well, you have cells and ATP synthase, and then that happens, and then there's that reaction, and then like new things form from energy input, and it's like, yeah, cool, man. Like, if I have a power saw, a drill, and a jackhammer, I can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, what's your point?
I want to know how we got the cell, how we got you can't just invoke all the pieces. I mean, come on.
Well, like, that's what I wanted to also add was that, so not only do we have all these pieces, right? But like I was trying to say, the RNA chains, they're like a packet. So with TCP/IP protocol, all those are, so you take a picture, right? And a picture is X amount of data, right? A gigabyte, whatever, a megabyte of data. And it's just a string of information. And so what the protocol does is it breaks that up into packets. So say, for example, you got this one picture, it breaks it up into 100 packets, right? And then it puts what's called a header and a footer on each packet that basically tells the gateways and all the different DNS, all the internet, quote unquote, all the other computers out there, where each packet's going to go, basically. So it can try to send, and it'll send those individual packets. And basically, whenever the gateway receives that, it'll read that header and say, okay, you're trying to go there. My best guess to get there is this guy's computer. So then it goes through all the different, however many computers it takes to get to that location. So that's what RNA is. It's a packet. It's useless by itself. And so when it gets to the location, then it gets all the packets together, and then it puts it back together into a string, and then there's your picture, right? Or there's your voice, whatever it is we're transmitting over the internet. So basically, the analogy, and I did this to talk about this with the IT guy on another forum, was that to say that the RNA, that the packet part of DNA, say that RNA could create life by itself, so to say, that could create DNA, is literally like claiming that the internet could have started itself without computers.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Well, and what I find very interesting about that, and your point on the headers and footers and the destination addresses and the different protocols, I mean, you're talking about in the context of the RNA. What we're now knowing is that the output from the ribosome in terms of the protein also has designated header and footer address
intercept
protocols. And then it's like, oh, cool. While it's heading off to the ER or the different places for the actual end maturation, they'll like cut off a portion of it. Like, okay, once it arrives at the warehouse, oh wait, we're going to rip off this label. We're going to literally install a new label.
Yes, it's like traffic control.
And then it's going to get loaded onto a truck protein that takes it to the exit portal of the cell, and then it hops in the freaking bloodstream and zips across, who knows where, to another cell. It's an imported, scanned, and then taken to the end destination. I'm like, what?
Exactly.
To me, when you think about that from a logistics perspective, like, you are kidding me, right? Like, this is actually happening. Oh yeah.
My wife.
Wait, hang on. You believe that this happened by accident?
Right.
What?
If it happened by accident, it would just self-destruct every day. But she just came with a brilliant analogy. Said they're I think it's brilliant. It's like they're packing Santa's sleigh. I love that.
It's very true.
That's like that this cannot happen by chance. This is just like
right.
icing.
It's all orchestrated.
It's beyond, like what would it take to convince them that this couldn't happen? Because we're way past, like, to me, like a rationality. Like, we're to deny that.
And I have a theory about what's going on because I think what I'm about to say, I think will be easily recognized. So the evolutionary biologists, at least the ones that I've debated and engaged with, they adamantly cling to the premise that this is not equivalent to computer technology and logistics and data, like real data, right? They adamantly cling to that premise. And it's just chemical reactions, all that fun stuff. And I think part of it is a huge portion of this, whether it's conscious or subconscious, is the fact that the average person is now starting to have at least a modicum of understanding of computer science to some degree. Like, they understand coding to some extent. And I think they are clinging to, like, desperate to defend against that concept being recognized by the layman as being directly applicable to biological systems. Because the second that happens, then it's the ultimate chink in the armor of evolutionary theory being the be-all end-all factually proven evidence. Because you think about all the kids out there that are learning coding in high school right now. Like, you get out of there and it's like, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's like freaking APIs that are going down, and there's like markup language and programming language and all this, like, wait a minute. Wait, hang on, wait, you're telling me that's going on in me right now? Hang on, so there's like apps that are rocking out functions on a molecular level, and there's AI. Like, you're telling me that this happened through evolution? What? That question is going to be raised. Like, there's no way around it, unless, obviously the brainwashing is to an extent, but you got to think about, like, people that are in their late 40s, 50s, 60s, like, what percentage of people had any understanding of computer science that are in that? And if you're over 55, like, you might have some knowledge in it, but it wasn't a fundamental component of your upbringing, is the point I'm making.
They understand.
It wasn't an instinctual portion from childhood on. Like, you learned it and became an expert in it as an adult, but it wasn't something you grew up with, is my point.
They got to build computers. I don't think kids now, they might be able to program it, but they don't know how it works, basically. But anyway, I was convinced that the fact there's error correction. Chemicals there's no such thing as an error in chemicals. Like, this is nonsensical. You know what I mean? Like, what is it? A chemical to have an error and to have a mechanism that corrects an error. Like,
well, right. Even the word error to exist means you have to have a purpose. And so you have to have something that makes a mistake for the purpose. Right.
Yeah.
It's something I think is very interesting and people like kind of forget about is, like, with Watson-Crick pairing, right? We get all hyped up on the, what that matching sets are, right? But people forget that there is no chemical bond between the pairs. Like, in between each nucleotide, you've got a hydrogen bond, right? And then you have the bond to the phosphate backbone. There is no chemical bond between each base pair set. So you have literally random pairing, like a bond, like sequence. Sorry, like, there is no because there is no chemical bond. You can't argue that there's a chemical affinity that would result in a sequence. Like, you can't make that argument with any kind of rational plausibility. So you ultimately boil down to it's 100% random to get a specific sequence that also is translatable per the decode table that's delineated for the ribosome. Like, there's no other way around this. And
that'll put the box to the question I've been trying to ask for a couple of decades, and I asked it last night with that was the guy's name Dinemer? is how does a monophosphate form in a free floating phosphate bath based on those bonding issues you just mentioned? I don't see how it's possible.
Well, and to my knowledge, nobody's answered it.
Right. I've been asking for 20 years.
And I've actually seen interviews with chemists who were like they've literally stated, I've been a chemist for 20 years and had never considered that premise. And the second I did, and actually went to make sure I wasn't missing something, exactly. Okay, I don't know what I believe in, but I sure as hell don't believe in evolution.
I was a kid when I was doing 25, 26 years old, and I started asking those questions when I was already doing plasma physics, right? Because the long story short, so I got my degree after I got hired in all these wonderful things. And as I'm taking this degree, I'm like, wait a minute, how does this happen? Because I'm already doing the chemistry, right? I'm already doing the physics, and I started asking professors these questions, and they're like, what the heck? What do you mean? What? It's the things that I've never asked about. And so I made a lot of enemies. I made a lot of friends, and it was fun, but it's never answered. I keep asking it.
Well, James Tours made this point multiple times in different talks he's given of like, there's so many things in chemistry and biology that are just operated as assumptions. Like, oh yeah, they figured that out in like 1971 or something. They figured that out. There's some paper, and they'll even quote a paper. And it's like, if you actually go and read the paper, they didn't solve it.
Right.
It's like, wait, hang on. So you cited a paper that didn't actually say what you said it cited, but it's so old, and you guys have been operating under the assumption that it's proven that nobody actually goes to read your citation. Therefore, everything else is the assumptions are concluded as correct. And I'm like, how is this not the literal fruit of the poison tree?
Yeah, it's religion. They take it as gospel, regardless if there's any truth to it or not.
Yeah,
it's annoying.
Facts be damned, right?
Yeah, that whole. I mean, a lot of my debates, I start off with that argument of like, in terms of abiogenesis, I'm like, literally everything that's going to proceed as the result of this debate is going to be dependent on the fruit of a poison tree. And there is no court of law in which this level of assumption would ever enable any of the data to be, or the evidence being presented to be accepted. It would not be admissible because you're like, hang on. So you have literally everything that you're presenting is hearsay, like literally everything.
Or
it's even worse. Get out of my courtroom,
It's worse than hearsay. It's make believe, literal. There's no science to it. It's just it's an idea that they wanted to try to fit some ideas to. Are you familiar with the E. coli, the LTE experiments with citrates?
Are you talking about the Lindsay experiments?
I believe that's
yeah. With the whole the citrate. Yeah. I am.
Yeah, so that's been a 30-year long nonstop. That's probably one of the best, if not the best.
70,000 generations and no sign of macroevolution.
Right. No, it's millions of generations in Tingalo. How many did you say?
70,000.
No, it's in the millions now. The paper I read recently, and I share this paper, and they see the headline. They're like, oh yeah, see, look, that's proof. Why are you giving me a headline that shows that proves evolution?
Are you talking about the article? The one you're talking about is the very recent one. It's like showing how they're like dying now.
No, I don't mention. Well, it's been going on so long that of course there's ones dying, but the one I'm talking about.
The mutations are starting to. No, the mutations are starting to go extinct. The ones that had like the biggest mutations, like this is the most recent. There was a debate between Kevin Anderson and Jackson Wheat a month ago, and Jackson Wheat tried to make the argument about the Lindsay experiment, and Kevin Anderson was like, "Oh yeah, let's bring up the most recent paper." And it was from like last year, and it was showing that the ones that were supposedly evolving were now going extinct. They were dying, and they were like the mutations had reached a point where they were actually actually dying, not surviving.
It was better than that. They're dying. But they found out was that citrate mechanism, it was part of that archive system. It's already pre-programmed, pre-engineered.
Oh, so that absolutely, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so that whole deal was temporarily helps it breathe the citrates, and then when it's done, it's no longer needs to adapt to that new environment. It puts it back in, and so it de-evolves.
Yeah, well, and the
thing is a beneficial mutation whatsoever. Like every time they invoke these mutations to explain something, it seems like they all get overturned all the time.
Well, and the thing with the citrate deal was there was a gene duplication, and the only difference between the original and the quote-unquote new one was the promoter region, the on-off switch was not there. So it was defaulting to expression. And and that was the literal only thing that had to be modified in order for it to process the citrate. So there was absolutely no new function whatsoever. It was literally the removal of the on-off switch. That was it. So there was no sequence modification at all. And I mean, obviously, the little minor, mutation errors and stuff, but nothing in terms of like new sequence function.
Well, yeah, no, it did modify the sequence, but it was, again, it's one of those pre-programmed, archived things we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Where it changed the order of the sequence. It changed where the three-dimensional map was connecting just right to create this new function. This what seemed to be like a new function, a quote unquote mutation, but it wasn't a mutation. It was just part of the code, pre-existing.
Well, it's something else. I had a very interesting interview on my channel last week with Dr. Rob Stadler, and we actually discussed this experiment. And one of the other things we talked about was briefly, and then it's in his book, the scientific approach to evolution, what they didn't teach you in biology. And he actually goes into great detail about something that has even greater level in terms of like generations required. And that's the malaria adaptations. And it was something ridiculous, like over 1 trillion organisms was required to get 2 point mutations, which enabled it to adapt to this like specific type of preventer. And I'm like, so you had to have 1 trillion organisms to get. Actually, no, the back. It was 4. It was 4 point mutations. It was what were actually required. 4.
Actual mutations would be my question.
Yeah, they were mutations, but it was like deprecation of data, not addition. But it was 4 point mutations. It took 1 trillion, the equivalent of 1 trillion organisms to account for 4 point mutations to enable it to adapt to this specific type, this original type of vaccine.
Hey, John, I was in an interview. I just want to know where is that guy from? Like, is he, like, I just never heard of him before.
Dr. Stadler?
Yeah.
He is a pretty his professional focus. He's in like cardiology engineering, like medical device engineering and such. He got his PhD. He did a dual PhD from Harvard and MIT. And then he's been doing like creating medical devices for 20-some years. He's a fellow at different. He's pretty well credentialed. He's got like 140 patents. Pretty crazy stuff. But he actually decided to get into this whole stuff with evolution, and he had another really good book, Stairway to Life, on abiogenesis. But he read one of his son's high school textbooks and was like, "What the hell is my son being taught?" Basically, and then started going into it and being like, look at college books and stuff. He hadn't been in college for 20 years. I mean, he's been off being a professional, for 20 years, whatever. And he's like, you got to be kidding me. There's no way this is actually being taught as fact, So he started diving into it, and looking at all of the, he basically went and did a detailed analysis of like the primary pieces of evidence that are being put forth as like the proof. And he's like, what the heck is this? Like, this isn't proof. And what he does is he applies throughout his book, he applies the 6 criteria of credibility for scientific research. And he's like, he's like, I have to go and get every piece of research I'm doing in medical research. I have to follow all of these because the FDA requires us. He's like, every aspect of science requires you to have the high level of confidence in the criteria you're applying to whether or not something is true and proven, and confidence also. Anyway, he's like, I don't understand how all of these pieces of supposed evidence don't even come close to fulfilling the requirements that are necessary for any other type of. He's like, you couldn't get anything past, proved in any other aspect of research,
right,
under the same supposed standards of evolutionary theory.
Evolution has no application to real life. That's why it doesn't matter. It's like a philosophy,
it's a religion.
You know what I mean? Not a science that actually, like a medical in like medicine and stuff, where it actually matters the things you're saying. Like, it's just brainwashing people and perpetuating a myth, basically.
Yeah, it's a religion.
Yeah, it gets weird. But yeah, I tell you what, man, I'm gonna have another interview with him on the 18th, where I dive into his book on the Stairway to Life. And man, that's a freaking awesome book. It does like the deep dive into abiogenesis and not only like the requirements, but also like doing an analysis of some of the supposed proofs of like, oh, we're getting so much closer. And he partnered with another biochemist, Change Tan, I think her name is, and they dove into it big time on the chemistry of like, yeah, cool. So there's these little things called restriction enzymes, you freaking idiots, and they don't actually say this, but it's like all this jazz about the genes just like did all this crazy horizontal transfer and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, okay, cool, yeah. So there's crazy limitations on that, and there's these stupid things called restriction enzymes that are literally in place, and if DNA that is not doesn't have the appropriate tags, epigenetic tags, it literally comes in and terminates it.
Right.
Like,
right.
Get out of town, bro. Get out of town. If you're claiming this, this didn't account. Like this isn't. You don't have to account for this. Like we just magically all just metamorphosized into this stuff from being close to each other, and now we have these like crazy new gene functions. Except there's like termination factors that you have to account for. Oh wait, you're not? Are you just ignoring them? Okay, then I don't take your argument seriously. Then
I used to make the argument that life does everything it can. It tries everything. How do I put this? Sorry, it works very hard to prevent evolution.
Well, I tell you something else that I read recently that I thought was very fascinating is that prokaryotes, they actually seem to, based on environmental pressures, seem to have the ability to raise and lower their variability to look in terms of adaptation. And like they're actually being able to an extent, measure this. Like, hang on. So there's it's under crazy pressure, and it's like activate the variable option to see if we can find a way to counter this new problem. And then when it goes back to a less pressured environment, then that whole deal basically goes back into safe mode, if you will. And
I've read how basically stress will affect epigenetic markers. That's what it sounds like you're talking about.
Well, yes, it will. Yeah, absolutely. Stress will affect epigenetic markers. And this is like in literal like gene sequence variation.
Wow.
And because like you think about it with like the immune system, right? The antibody proteins literally have the stable portion and the variable portion, and are literally doing real time on the fly search for a way to counter this new virus, right? Or whatever the antigen is. But the majority of their protein is fixed and is the same basically every single time. And then there's literally little portions of it that are real-time variable. Like, get out of here, man. Have you ever seen like animation of that stuff? That'll blow your mind.
What do you call that computer? What do you call that in computers when they have like software that learns, like learning software like that? You know what I mean? That
learning
solves problems and stuff. I forget what it's called. Kind of like artificial intelligence.
Yeah. You're bringing me back to some of the stuff that I'm recognizing about how there really is. I mean, yes, there's dynamic functions, or there's things that there's stored archived data that DNA retrieves and then uses for various means, but it doesn't change. It doesn't evolve. It's not immutable. So all the changes that we think we see, like you're describing, it seems like it's all pre-codified. The more we understand and learn these things.
It seems like it would have to be to me. I mean, you don't get too many trials and errors in life. You know what I mean? Like you need these things there, or you're dead, kind of thing.
Well, the whole assumption for the whole debate is whether or not DNA changes, and how, if it does change, how would it change? But the more we talk about these changes, the more I'm wanting to go back to this idea that I've been learning over the last few years, that it doesn't. It's all pre-change. It's all pre-engineered to be able to be adaptive. Even allele groups, which seem to be ERV type things, but there's mechanisms that seem to allow for some sort of random ability for it. even those aren't random. There's mechanisms that make sure and that control whenever a certain allele group would change in a certain way, that it does it within a certain range of parameters. And we describe that in human programming languages, particularly with AI constructs. We call those finite state machines. And we create what's called a list. We have like either a heuristic or basically just a container of list of options of whatever it is that the state machine is going to do. And it can't do anything outside of that list. And if it does, we will have regulators that say, okay, no, to those if-then statements you're talking about earlier, logical. If this is outside of this range, then don't allow it. Go back, redo the list or do some sort of iteration. And we see that in DNA. So even the things that look like there's some sort of ability for it to accept random changes are pre-programmed and restricted and do the same things that we do in our own code to give the illusion of random variability, but really aren't.
What was the top level term you just said for that type of protocol?
Oh gosh, finite state machine.
Yes, finite state machine. Yeah, and in line with that, you're talking about ERVs and retrotransposons and all that kind of stuff. Like, to me, when you look at the account doing all the things you just talked about and being finite state machines, but also in line with that in terms of like real world functionality, it's like they have clear spatiotemporal variable control.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just like supposition; it's like proven at this point now. Of like, oh, cool.
3D structure.
So it's going to go here during embryo development, and then further on in the embryo development, it moves from there to there, and then once it gets into adolescence, then it goes to here, and then in adulthood, it goes over here. And and the part that blows my mind is
it has to do that way. Right?
It has to, otherwise there's death.
Right.
But, but not only that, what blows my mind, this is where the term you made, the finite state machine, I'm like having multiple variable functions allowed, like pre-programmed, right? Of what we're observing now is that this retrotransposon is here in the genome physically in this stage, and it's causing this outcome. But then when it moves to a different location, it's causing an entirely different functional outcome.
Right. With another purpose.
Right. That's my point. It's the exact same chunk, if you will, but it's causing a different variable outcome that is required both from a spatio location as well as the temporal, as well as the pre-programmed function.
Right.
And to me, at this point, this is what cracks me up when I listen to the atheists and the evolutionists like argue that somehow this is proof of evolution. I'm like, you are a freaking idiot that knows nothing.
Exact opposite, right?
You're an idiot. This is literally the exact opposite when you think about it in the context that you and I are, we're all talking about tonight. Like, this literally destroys your argument, and you're too dumb to recognize this.
These details at all. I think they avoid these details because I don't see how you could even describe these things and then invoke some kind of natural random.
Right. This stuff is so intelligently designed that we're trying to learn it. We're trying to learn how God programs things. And that brings me to something I wanted to say earlier when you're talking about software and as far as the genome code goes. The people that I've talked to off and on over the years about this stuff, because I started my career in electronics, but then I moved into inorganic chemistry. So I've always had an interest, and I was telling this to Dimitri last night, in organic chemistry. And the guys that I talk to that are organic chemists, they describe to me that you can't do biology today without a software engineering background. It's just impossible.
Yeah. Well, and
biology is useless for biology today.
Well, when you think about did you know that MIT, some dudes at MIT, they modified the Verilog language directly to be utilized for genetic programming?
I saw that, and they did some sort of, they got like a free online CRISPR thing. You can edit your own code or whatever now.
But I'm like, okay. And then there's another group. Cambridge did their own variation of it, and some group in some university in India, they've done their. Right now, they're fighting, like academics, are fighting over who created the best programming language for DNA. And I'm like,
it's just.
I'm like, wait a minute, hang on.
For a language that already exists, right?
like, hang on. Well, I think what I find interesting about it is like, yeah, cool. It's a language that can be directly translated into the genetic code. Like, this isn't a whole. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Like, doesn't surprise me at the slightest, right?
It's a 4-bit operating system. Yep.
But the fact that the evolutionary biologists and the atheist activists, like the ones we've been interacting with on a regular basis here on YouTube, like, they adamantly deny the logic that we're talking about. And it's like, they have literally created a direct translation language variable, like to do custom programming, create their own circuits and everything else. Like, they're freaking if-then functions. Like, what the hell more has to be done to reach the conclusion? And I watched a very interesting programming conference from December this past year, and one of the keynotes was about, they were trying to recruit software engineers to come work in genetic programming, and they were trying to recruit them. And what I thought was hilarious was they were like, now listen, what we're doing, trust us, is way cooler than what you're doing right now.
It is.
And also, it is, you're doing some cool stuff in software in your corporate job, whatever. Nothing, it's not even close to as cool as what we're doing, right? Yep. And they're like breaking it down, like, well, here's how it's Turing complete, and this how, they're like breaking all this logic, and basically being like, ignore what the dumbasses in your university told you about this being like chemical reactions. Like, this is real deal, like programming. Like, you're doing some hardcore crap. Like, this will be the biggest challenge you've ever come across in your life, And like I said, that was from December of last year, and I'm like, and I listened to and I engaged these folks online. I'm like, you guys are so ignorant. You're so ignorant if you're going to argue that this is random chance, like chemical processes. You get out of town.
I think evolution is based on ignorance almost, though, because the more we find out about life and cells and DNA, the less it fits their paradigm. So evolution is based on ignorance.
Well, and on Tegelo, you've seen me debate some of the forums that he and I share on Facebook. I go into the history of it. If you guys really hear the real dark, evil, deep history of evolution, I've studied the history of it long enough. I can go into that as well, outside of just the theories. If anybody's interested in that, I mean, I don't know. It's about white supremacy. It's about fraud.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is the eugenics aspect of it that was derived directly from the premise. It fascinates me how in the modern era we're in now, people try to deny that and like claim that that's not what happened. It's like, well, your history is obvious because in their publications and their articles and their books, they literally said this. Like it's.
I quote Darwin directly. Yeah,
you're turning racism into a science. Basically, that's what evolution is.
Something I find very interesting when you think about, and the kind of what you're alluding to, Joel, is what is the direct preface to the mass chaos of the 20th century? It was the adoption of evolutionary theory and all of its ramifications from a societal perspective, not just a scientific one. And like you see it with World War I escalating into World War II and all this other stuff. And then now we see it in societal aspects of the deprecation of family units and just social structure and the cascade. And then when you think about the identity politics that we're now dealing with, it is just, good Lord. Like identity politics would not be viable without evolutionary theory.
Agreed. That is the primary motive.
Just pushing God out of the world. This is all we're trying to do, and the consequences is the world. This is what we get.
Well, yeah, agreed. And I think one of the underlying components of it is you are able to remove objectivity and apply subjectivity to everything at that point.
No.
And the second you're able to do that, then you can justify anything. And there is no like logic. It's part of the reason, like my screen name, like logical, plausible, probable. It's like we now have folks that, like, yeah, if you're smart, you can come up with a stupid logic game that can justify basically anything, right? But it doesn't mean that your logic game is plausible. And it also doesn't mean that it's probable. And like in my opinion, to actually reach rational conclusions, you must apply logic, plausibility, and probability. And if any one of those variables is just freaking out to lunch, then you're probably wrong. You know, now there's obviously there's outliers, but you're probably wrong. Like there's a very strong probability that you're being an idiot if you haven't applied those 3 protocols to your decision-making process. And when you look at all this madness that's happening in both historically and in modern, right now, it's like, I'm guessing that all 3 of those have just kind of left the building in terms of people's decision-making.
I bring up
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I talk too much. Go for it.
I was just going to say that I try to bring up to atheists all the time that whether they, I don't think they realize that they're trying to undermine the foundation or, our freedom, our value, morality, all our rights. Like whether they, whether they believe or not, God provides, objectivity. You know what I mean? It's just not someone's opinion now. Like God's the standard. So, we're all equal. We all deserve rights, justice. All these things are grounded in God. So when you just remove that, anything goes. Like, I don't know why they don't.
News with that is Bitsky is that there are atheists out there, at least, that do recognize that. So as an example, there's a professional historian named Tom Holland. He recently published a book called Dominion. And it describes in great detail. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend everybody to read it that's interested in the history of what you're describing. How he calls it the Christian Revolution. How Christianity specifically revolutionized the world. How before Christianity and certainly in cultures outside of it, it's might makes right. It's mob rule. It's all these wonderful, these hateful, wonderful things that we want to avoid as far as like Americans or just Western culture. Pluralistic type people. To begin with, none of that happened or was in culture anywhere until Christianity. And atheists do recognize that, maybe not in the broader sense.
I've heard some atheist philosophers say it's a useful fiction, and I mean at least they're acknowledging it's a problem. You know what I mean? So I mean because I think atheists are humans who deserve rights and they have value and. You know what I mean? But when you can't provide any justification for it, that becomes a big problem.
Well, we also live in first world, and a huge portion of the stupidity coming out of the atheist worldview does not make any sense. The second you remove the first world, luxury from the equation.
Right.
And I think we witness this all the time in the riots that are going on across America, right? Like the little soy boys are running around talking trash, and then the second they get into a fight and they start getting their ass beat, they start yelling for the police.
Right.
Literally.
Videos about that.
It's like, dude, you were literally in the face of the cop 2 seconds ago, telling him he was the worst scum and like dropping insult after insult, throwing stuff at him. You guys are throwing fireworks at all this kind of stuff. And then the second you start getting your ass beat, you panic and run to the cops. Like, does the irony of this does this not compute? Right? Just like, you guys are idiots.
Reacting to that indoctrination we mentioned earlier.
No, well, I agree. I mean, I agree 100%. That's my point is like the second you remove like we're heading directly towards anarchy. I mean, it's obvious. Like this is a direct trajectory for this.
The Titler cycle, have you heard of that?
Sorry, say that again.
The Titler cycle?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's like, oh gosh, I forget the steps, but where a nation's, it's goes through these cycles. Society. There's looks like Untitled just dropped out. There you are. We go through plenty.
Guys, I'm gonna have a watch at Speed's channel, and I'll be back in 20 minutes or so.
Okay.
He started his stream. Let's see what he has to say. But you can continue here. You can continue your chat, and I'll be back.
Hey, Untitled, if there's any atheists that you find in there that want to join this channel again, we're just gonna kind of talk about the things we already agree with.
Yeah, Angelo, I'm gonna in a couple minutes I'm gonna bounce over to Standing for Truth so I catch the tail end of the Bill Morgan and Ron Garrett debate.
Okay, so I think we are already 3.5 hours online. We can stop. our stream, and I'll have a look what Speed has to say about the whole mess here.
I did want to make one other point of what you talked about earlier, Logical, about your 3-word thing, the logical, plausible, probable thing.
Yeah.
When you mentioned that reminded me of the basic change in scientific viewpoints for humanity, where before the Christians' scientific method, before Bacon and them started the scientific method, we relied on what was called Aristotelian philosophical truth statements.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what changed the world from just logical, philosophical truths to the actual idea of testing empirical evidence repeatedly, observably in real time. That's the two different sort of say worldviews of science now.
And the irony is that the atheists love to use if it's not empirical and testable, repeatable predictions, then it's not science. It cracks me up how much they use that, and it's like, you do realize you can't apply this to your own worldview, right?
Right. How do you test for billions of years again? What?
Like, you literally cannot apply your own standard to your own argument, but you're claiming that deduction does not apply.
They think reductionism could answer everything. So by reducing everything to its fundamental pieces, will somehow explain everything.
I had a fun debate with the guy whose name, a tag team debate with one of the guys I was up against. His nickname, his screen name, literally, not figuratively, is "Religion is bullshit." That's literally his name. Okay.
Oh, that's good.
And in the debate, I was making the argument that, okay, man, what counts as evidence, for deduction? I'm like, there's two cars have run into each other. There's no drivers. They're in the middle of the street. Is it reasonable to conclude that there were drivers at some point that resulted in the two vehicles driving into each other? Well, I don't know. It could have been a robot. And it's like, come on, man. If we're going down to this level of just, semantic lunacy, then what's the point of even having dialogue? If you're going to claim that you can't have a reasonable deduction, and that can't serve as evidence for your end conclusion, then you live in a completely fantasy. You live in a fantasy land of I'm only going to believe whatever I think fits my worldview, not what the evidence actually showcases.
Dogma.
Anyway, all right, guys. I've really enjoyed it. I want to go catch the tail end of the debate over in Standing for Truth. And Otangelo, I may do an after show of the debate too. I'm debating.
Yeah, it will be late. It's already 11 at night here in Brazil, so I'll probably not join your after show. But it was great to have you all here at my channel. It's a great pleasure, and hope to see you soon again to keep our chats and enjoying each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
God bless everyone.
Would you guys mind linking me this other debate? I like to follow too. I'm still.
Yeah, I'll shoot you I'll put the link in chat real quick. Give me 1 second.
Appreciate it.
All right, do you have are you just in StreamYard, or do you have the YouTube chat pulled up too?
I'm currently just in StreamYard.
Okay,
I can see both, I think.
I'll put it in private chat, and I'll put it in the.
Okay, Joel, I just put you the link here in the private chat.
Appreciate you guys.
Okay.
And all right, I'm heading over to SFT. Screw it.
It's a pleasure. I'd like to pick your y'all's brains.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk to you more too, man. Have a great night, y'all.
Have a good night. Bye-bye, guys. Bye.
Night.